Hello? Did I turn it off? No, hello? Hello? Welcome all to the Schwartz Theater. It's awesome to see so many people here today. Really excited to have first our graduating student thesis reading, which will last approximately an hour. Each student's going to read for about 5 minutes and be introduced very briefly by their faculty member. And without further, then we'll take a short break and segue to the graduation ceremony. But it's now my pleasure to introduce the graduating class of the Creative Writing Program, Masters of Fine Art Program in Creative Writing at EOU. 2023 graduates, come on in. I think you'll agree during and after their readings that this is an extraordinarily talented bunch. We've been very lucky to work with them, and I'm saying too much too soon, but we're sorry to see them leave, but they won't really leave, and we know they'll be here next year and involved in this community for a long time to come. Let's get right to it. It's my great pleasure to have helped advise Gabriel Boehmer's thesis, Major Mood Disorder, this spring. Gabriel's thesis is a walking tour through personal and Portland history and the way it intertwines, and it profiles family members as well. It often interrogates corporate culture and his own place in it, and turns like a tendriling urban vine toward a love of literature and books that have brought him to this work and to us. And it also brings him to a steadfast emphasis on social justice. He is playful on the page, diving into prose poems and other concrete forms, and relentlessly introspective, not shying away from himself in the mirror of his poems and letting us see, too. I come away reading Major Mood Disorder and feeling there's more order and truth in my life. Gabriel, come on up.
Thank you all for being here. And now there should be a name for this called the Adjust the Microphone After Nick Talks. Because as we know, Nick Neely is probably the tallest MFA director in the United States. And I believe this program can monetize that. Can you all hear? All right. I want to thank very quickly Nick and my other reader, Molly Reed, for their very generous time and comments that really helped me see some new things. And I also want to thank Molly specifically for the title of my thesis, which she dug out of a poem. So that is worth the price of admission right there, if you're thinking about this as a program, which I hope you are. Also, I want to thank both my children for being here. I do want to say I fully support, Claire, fully support the actors and screenwriters strike. However, I had planned to hire equity actors to play my children at the ceremony because of the long drive. So because of the strike, they actually had to come. And they're playing themselves wherever they are. Thank you. They're playing themselves, Cameron and Amelie. Thank you for being here. The title of the poem, Major Mood Disorder. Some people reread a great book like The Great Gatsby or To Kill a Mockingbird over and over. My father reread Dickens and Samuel Johnson ad nauseum. Me, I find myself turning again and again to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. Not everyone's cup of tea. Yet, for me, this compendium of disorder contains more plot twists than A Tale of Two Cities. In the new edition of the DSM-5, for example, no longer are alcohol abuse and alcohol dependence different conditions. These two formerly independent disorders, think East Germany and West Germany, were combined into a single alcohol abuse disorder. Sort of like McDonald's takes a Big Mac and fries and packages them into a combo meal. As an aside, there was never any disorder in my alcohol use per se. I carefully planned my blackout strategy. For example, ordering 2 drinks at once, especially if the server was harried by a large crowd. Another DSM-5 plot pivot. Major mood disorder now describes my condition formerly known as depression. I liked the shorter name. It lent itself comfortably as an adverb. I am depressed versus I am major mood disordered. The latter lacks the same sadness. Remember when Prince changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol? Now that had zing. As Prince wrote, it's all about thinking in new ways, tuning into a new frequency. And for my second piece, just a couple of minutes here, is a piece of flash fiction, which I didn't even know existed prior to Molly Reed's influence. So this is a very, very short story, which is kind of morphing into a prose poem. So we'll see what it wants to be. Now listen carefully to the title. It conveys a lot of the information you need to get through to the end of the story. This is the title. The Friday morning, they found out their boss had died in her hotel room sometime overnight after an evening of binge drinking with them on her expense account. I texted her, he said. He said her in such a way as to communicate his exasperation at her inability to ever be on time for checkout. He said to himself, I set 3 alarms for business travel days, which was true. First, iPhone, which plays Hard Work by saxophonist John Handy, 4 hours before takeoff. Second, a wake-up call from the front desk, 3 hours and 45 minutes before takeoff. Third, his Travelway digital alarm clock. No date, temperature, or radio, just big, hangover-penetrating numbers and an alarm, 3 hours and 30 minutes before takeoff. I set 3 alarms for business travel days, and she can't even set 1. Did you call her? She said, call, in such a way as to communicate her judgment of SMS as a passive-aggressive way to communicate, a stance that she had adopted from a Gen Z colleague via a text message at an offsite about intergenerational communication styles. She said to herself, I always pack the night before a flight, which was true. She eliminated inefficient fashion indecision by always wearing the same travel outfit: black Zella leggings, fitted cotton black t-shirt, white slip-on Vans, black full-zip fleece hoodie, and Ray-Ban aviators. I always pack the night before the flight. Why does she wait until the last minute? Why won't she ever let us fly out of Oakland? He said. He said, Oakland, in such a way as to communicate his opinion that it afforded faster security checkpoints than SFO, lower risk of fog-delayed takeoff, and a Vino Volvo at the top of the concourse escalator with reasonably priced Pinot Grigio. Because Oakland has a shitty Delta Sky Club, she said. She said Oakland in such a way as to communicate its exclusion from exclusivity. She said, did you call her? She said each word in such a way as to communicate her exasperation at his inability to ever use the phone for talking. He is about to say no with his lips, but without sound. Why don't you fucking call her? He said. He said it without looking at her while looking on his phone for a flight out of Oakland. What did she say? She said. She said, say, in such a way as to communicate that her détente with his passive-aggressive texting had expired. He is about to say, I am not your fucking secretary. At which point she would say, no one says secretary anymore, Dick. To which he would reply, sorry, inbreeder. I am not your fucking administrative assistant. But instead, he actually says, I love your curtain bangs. Suddenly, they're seeing EMTs running through the lobby of the Plaza Hotel. Are you even seeing this? He said. Must be free coffee in the ballroom, she said. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Gabe. Next up, we have Kristen Ariel Cariaga. And her mentor was James Cruz, and I have the pleasure of reading some words that he sent. Kristen's accessible, exquisite poems seek to reunite us not only with the natural world, which she brings to life so eloquently, but also with ourselves. As she writes in her poem, Reunion, sitting on the river's bank, the pieces of you that had been floating land back in your body. Though her seamless poems make it look easy, it is no simple task to write in a style that welcomes readers of all backgrounds and persuasions. These generous, open-armed poems invite us all back into the gardens that we are, urging us to, quote, let the human weight drop at our ankles for a while, unquote, and pay closer attention to the worlds outside of and within us. Kristen.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Nick, for all the work you've done to shape this program. Thank you to my sweet family who's here, my mom and dad, and mother-in-law and father-in-law, and my husband. And a special thank you to my husband who talked me into applying for this program. And thanks to James Cruz as well, who's just been an invaluable mentor in this process. He already gave you a few of the lines of my opening poems, so that's okay, though. You know, sometimes it's good to hear poetry a couple times. So my thesis is a collection of poetry. That's my focus for the MFA, and it's specifically mindfulness poetry, which is something James introduced me to. And as soon as I started writing in this style, it really felt like coming home to me. And if you're not familiar, mindfulness poetry, just my quick definition is it's poetry that's seeking to put you in the present moment and to celebrate the present moment. And then it's also working to be more accessible to more people, so more poetry in more people's hands. And then it's also seeking to bring hope, which is something I think we all need. So this is the first poem. I'll share 3 today. So this is called Reunion. Sitting on the river's bank, the pieces of you that had been floating without gravity, drifting downstream, land back in your body. Mind fits back inside skull, breath billows back into lungs, beating heart lands with a gentle thud in your waiting chest. Those parts find their way back to you, and you wind them up gently. This wayward ball of yarn that became your life with its strings loose in all directions. And then the second one is also water-inspired. A lot of my poems are water-inspired. This one's a little bit grittier. It was written after a fishing trip in Alaska, a fishing trip I had very mixed feelings about. But hopefully it still contains some of that mindfulness. This is called Long Lining for Halibut. Thrashing, a flash of metallic scales on the floor of the skiff. They catch the temporary sun, and the light glints too on the fish's fragile eye, an amber marble with dilated pupil. life expanding the shining black as it fights. Its tail kicks at anyone within range, exposing back, belly, sleek and vulnerable, and I see its gills, crimson and blossoming, delicate as rose petals. When we are home, safe down south in the lower 48, the halibut lies in packages. In my freezer, cold, pale, unmoving. Packages my mother will give to her neighbor. Packages my husband will give to his boss. Given and received until all the life is shared among us. And this is my and this is my final poem to share with you today. This is called Self-Talk in the Garden, and it's the title of the collection, and was written, talking to myself when I was gardening. And I think it's such a powerful practice to, we gain hope from our community, but we also can gain hope in life just from speaking to ourselves. So that's what this is about. Self-talk in the garden. Be gentle with your garden plot. Take care which seeds you choose to plant. And when you decide, tuck them into earth. With faith, they'll thrive. Water graciously. It is not a waste. You are not a waste. When those weeds spring up eager heads, take a moment to see if it's invasive or just a medicinal dandelion, and that if it is something that will choke, like unforgiveness, dig deep but be gentle at finding the root. If it grows back in the same spot, as it will, don't give up. It takes time to clear your ground. Sometimes, just plunge your hands into your land and delight in its spicy, dark richness with all its pebbles and twigs and earthworms. Let the world come rest here. The pillbug with its shiny exoskeleton, the dragonfly with shimmering shadow wings. If it's noisy and messy, all the better. Remember, when you were waiting, some bulbs rest all winter, but that doesn't mean they're dead or that you are a failure. Your garden will surprise you one day. You'll walk out your door and find the soft young leaves of cornflower, of poppy, shy and beautiful, happy to see sun for the first time. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everyone. Rebecca Delors' thesis, At Night the Birds Sing, is a hybrid invocation of the land, of self, of family, and what unfolds is a narrative of spirituality, a story of one woman's intimate and sensual engagement with the Pacific Northwest, and the often difficult things we must do in order to become who we desire to be. At Night the Birds Sing falls beautifully into a deeply rich tradition of ecological writing, bringing Rebecca's poetic sensibility to the world and drawing careful attention to all the beauty and the heartbreak that surrounds us. It's my honor to bring you up.
Thank you very much. It's a nice introduction. And I'd like to thank Melissa and my second reader, Nick. Very supportive, very encouraging. Melissa's already explained my thesis, so I'll just give you a small portion of that. And this first one is called Rain and Bourbon. Rain spatters and slides down the window, blurring hurried passerby, clutching their Christmas bags of tinsel, lights, ornaments, and gifts. I stare into my bourbon glass, the alcohol placid, warm, and inviting. Lighting is dim and smoky like my reflection in the mirror here at Lucky Larry's lounge. I signal the bartender for another drink. I push the cubes of ice to the bottom and swirl them with my index finger. I drink too much. I know this. Bourbon slides down my throat easily, like it did for my grandfather, my uncle, and my father. They blame their streak for wild, uninhibited drinking on their Indian blood. It's the Indian in us. We can get pretty crazy when we drink, my Uncle Jack would say. He nearly killed a man at a bar when the man next to him propositioned him for sex. The story was passed down through the family and told with a slow nod of the head, grin, and chuckle. Yep, that sounds like Jack all right, we would say. Uncle Jack was a logger with fists the size of calloused ham. My father's brothers were all swaggering loggers, driving muddy Chevy trucks. Their souls smelled like chainsaw oil and gasoline. They laughed, joked, smoked. Their pores spilled out tobacco, grime, and drink. I took my first drink of alcohol at 5 when Uncle Jack and my father told me to take a swig from the can of Ham's beer. While balanced on Uncle Jack's lap, I grasped the can with both hands and tipped back the blue aluminum can. I screwed up my face, and they broke out in a gravel-throated laughter. I asked for more, not because I liked it, but because I wanted to grow up, toughen up, and knock the shit out of anyone who got in my face, even if I did wear ponytails and pretty dresses. My mind wanders to the faded Lucky Larry's flickering neon sign. Bourbon and clinking cubes rattle the sides of my glass, and the cubes tap my front teeth. I take another deep swallow. My thoughts are warm and become lazy. I let the alcohol have its way with me. I relax my shoulders and feel the heaviness of my arms. I slouch under the weight of this 26-year-old skinny body. There isn't a crowd here at the bar. It's quiet except for the chimes and rings of the gaming machine in the next room. A woman sits on a tall, black-legged stool, cigarette hanging from her dry lips. Her wrinkled eyes study the endless playing cards that are dealt behind the screen. She's probably drinking gin and tonic. 2 middle-aged men in sport coats are sitting at the far end of the bar, one in blue jeans and wearing a tilted-back Pape Farm Machinery baseball cap, and the other with auburn swept black hair, close and shaven beard. They're drinking porter from bottles. It's 8 p.m. I've been at the bar since 5 p.m., and I won't be leaving until 11:30 p.m. I gaze back down at the rim of my glass. I'm studying the inner sleeves and cracks of my mind. I'm gathering my hits and misses that I've accumulated over my lifetime. In high school, I drank before class. In college, I drank before and between classes. I drank after work. Saturday nights, my sweaty palms gripped urine-stained toilets at the local pub, the Ben Woolen Mill. My grandfather, father, uncles, and cousins drank this way too. My grandfather died an alcoholic. Uncle Norm died at 56 from cirrhosis of the liver. The last time I saw him, I was 21. Norm was a shrunken man lying in a hospital bed with white sheets pulled up to his thin abdomen. I was shocked to see his body, black and blue, marbled between pale, moist skin. Blood was pooling inside of him. Hi, Becky. How are you? Good to see you. I miss you. Not doing too good. His throat hoarse and withered. I could barely hear his voice. His chestnut eyes were kind but beaten. It was the last words he said to me. The day he died, we were all drunk on whiskey. Uncle Jack, Dad, Jack's kids. Cases stacked on the kitchen linoleum floor. Gifts from neighbors and Norm's friends. After the military burial, I bought a 6-pack of beer, and in the twilight of evening, sat at my uncle's fresh grave, drinking Ham's beer. Before leaving, I poured a can on his grave, a gesture of kinship and love.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was beautiful and searing. And I also wanted to praise Kristen for her poise and unflappability when in your last poem you had an interruption. It's now my pleasure to speak on behalf of our colleague Kate Miles, who couldn't be here today, about Christopher Dana Densmore. Christopher is an enviable kind of writer, one who is uniquely able to find what is beautiful, bittersweet, and poignant about our place in the world, and who renders those observations with lyricism, nuance, and a commitment to the truth. Never one to shy away from complexity, self-interrogation, or thorny philosophical ideas, he inspires readers to embark upon a similar journey in their own lives. Whether it's a quiet moment with a hummingbird, a celebration of roadkill and dive bars, or a lament for the slow loss of a beloved relative, his writing pushes past expected description and easy answers and reminds us all about the power and insight to be found in a mindful life. Christopher.
Hello, everybody. Oh. We're gonna have to work on that trademark, Gabe, for the Nick Neely adjustment. Can everyone hear me clearly? Can anybody not hear me clearly? Closer to the mic? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so my thesis is a collection of essays, one of which, about a year before I started this program, I lived in my home in Western Massachusetts, which is a rural place, for about a year, helping my dad take care of my mom who has dementia. And it was like one of the last years of quality time that I had with her, and she's still with us, but she's not the self she used to be. And this essay is about blueberries and my mom. In the years of her cognitive decline, my mom has developed a fondness for blueberries that borders on obsessive. Many gallon-sized Ziploc bags or teal molded pulp carts of them, fresh, frozen, and sometimes rotting, occupy our freezer and fridge at all times. At the grocery store, I often remind her that we have loads of them here at the house. Still, she wants more. Blueberries, 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 she exclaims every morning with her ritual granola and yogurt. Perhaps she loves them with such ardor for their antioxidants, or perhaps she loves them for their red leaves in autumn, or their bee-teasing white bells in spring. Perhaps she loves them because they grow in disturbed places, in harsh soils, after fires. Or perhaps I'm grasping incorrigibly for a poetics in grief, running my rational fingers through scorched earth looking for seeds. When I ask her for her rationale, I find that we're well past the point of pithy quotes for a son's song of mourning. Her words these days are simple and limited. I love the flowers. They're so good. The flavors, pardon me, that was delightful. When I ask of her history with the fruits, whether she liked them as a girl growing up in the Chicago exurbs, she cannot remember. She begins to weep. I'm in trouble, Chris. On my 10th birthday in May, when lilacs bloom, my mom and I hiked up to the top of a local peak, Pine Cobble, with several of my friends. Vibrant and vital then, she radiated joy in solidarity with the leafing forest of late spring. Her hair was long and dark, her legs muscular. She moved with swagger. We couldn't pick berries that spring day, but perhaps we sniffed the flowers. There were many hikes to the top of that hill in my youth. I imagine that we must have picked the fruits together up there in late summer at some point, or at least I hope so. I wonder if I don't remember such an occasion, if the mountain remembers. If my mother doesn't remember, do memories of berries scarfed trailside linger in our cells somehow? Here, a confession, a confrontation with reality. I don't actually remember most of my life in sensory detail. So much of my narrative, anyone's perhaps, is one of attachment to received ideas, estimations of probabilities, and evasions of unflattering rots. Is there a language of bodies and berries weaving stories in the soil below our everyday vocabulary? And how does one relate to those beings whose tongues do not spell the tales we are accustomed to? I'm not sure whether my mother and I ever picked berries on that hillside, but I want to believe in that truth. And here you are, imagining it. So perhaps we did. Nowadays, however, we cannot hike to the low bush patches where the berries grow wild in the thin, acidic soils of the hilltop. Her balance has waned, she's lost a lot of weight, and her hair is thin and white. She usually looks a little lost or somewhat disheveled, and if she went alone, she would probably lose her way. Days later, the local paper would report her body among the undergrowth and the pitch pines. In this chapter of our story, these wild mountaintop fruits are out of reach. What we can do now is to plant some bushes in the garden for her, the garden she can't tend herself any longer. Imagine them now. 3 plump, prostate shrubs, fruiting now in July, between the terracotta flower pots and the snag of the old crabapple tree. It too now sending up resilient shoots, defying gravity after we cut it down. The berry bushes root near the raised vegetable beds Cousin Steve and I put in last spring, built on the spot where there used to be a fire pit, and before that a sandbox. When we dug up the plots, rubber dinosaurs emerged from the soil, antediluvian remnants of the fantasy cities my sister and I once built in the sand. Now, a hopeful abundance of fruit and flower abides. Countless words have been penned on the gift of eating food directly from the garden you grow. Here are mine, authentic if not original. Few spells more nourish delight. The pop of a single cherry tomato between the teeth in August redeems all the mudded labor in April. So imagine now the sun-bleached mulch around the bases of these new berry bushes. The jays and chickadees get to most of the fruits before we can, but that's okay. Blueberries, nonverbal delights that transcend species and time. Now, imagine the young woman lying beneath the sun-dappled shadows of the blossoming apple tree. One tuft hand draped over a soft belly, full with me, the other resting open-palmed in the grass. And now, imagine the old woman, ambling among the berries, wild-eyed and curious, soon to forget my existence. She brushes a few strands of white hair off her forehead as she leans in to pick the fruit. She pops the delicate blue morsel in her mouth. She gazes out over her flower beds, surveying decades of earthwork. She closes her eyes, chews, inhales, exhales. She smiles. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. That was beautiful. Can you guys hear me? It's my great pleasure to introduce Jensen Heike, reading from her manuscript, Not My Season. Alice Munro writes, "A story is not like a road to follow, it's more like a house. You go inside and stay there for a while, wandering back and forth, and settling where you like and discovering how the room and corridors relate to each other, how the world outside is altered by being viewed from those windows. You can go back again and again, and the house, the story, always contains more than you saw the last time." Jensen Heike is an architect of just this kind of house. Her thesis is an intimate Bildungsroman crafted from exquisite emotional detail, and the world she creates is so precisely rendered and resonant with longing that it exists now in my mind as vividly as memory. It's a place I'll return to again and again. Please welcome Jensen.
Thank you, Megan, for that introduction. I owe Megan a lot for my story, both as my advisor, and she also gave me the prompt that started it, so she's basically seen it from beginning to end. And thanks also to my family, who all drove really far to be here today. So I'm going to be reading a brief scene from my novel in progress. And the context you need is my main character, Jasmine, has recently gone through a breakup, and the other main character here is Lola, who is her grandmother. Jasmine sits on the stoop of her apartment a few hours after Olivia has left for good. They've been broken up for 2 whole days now. It only took 1 car trip for Olivia to load up her things. The sun has tucked itself behind a collection of clouds, so Jasmine wraps her arms around her knees for warmth, watching the neighbors across the courtyard through their living room window. They're a retired couple and have always been friendly enough with her and Olivia, though they never exchanged names. She doesn't know if they knew she and Olivia were in a relationship. Jasmine determines that this couple has found the perfect balance of spending time together and time apart. The woman spends most of her time growing cucumbers and tomatoes. The man mows the lawn or goes hunting. A big bear skin hangs across their wall. Olivia hated that. They would argue over whether the man killed it himself. Olivia thought so, but Jasmine believes it unlikely because all the times she watched him return from a trip covered in camo, big gun swinging from his shoulder, he never carried a carcass. Today, they're just watching TV together on the couch. It gets boring after a while. The birds perched on the power lines are talking, so Jasmine watches them instead. A group of 3 small brown ones seem to be arguing with a big black one. Jasmine doesn't know the species and briefly wonders if it's actually possible for them to communicate with each other. Olivia would probably know. The thought makes her feel sick, so she breathes in and out a few times, but the sensation remains. The brown trio flies away, but the blackbird stays. They seem to make eye contact, the bird cocking its head at her. Her arms fall to her sides in surprise. It reminds her of the bird that used to frequent the roof of her childhood home. Her dad was always trying to shoo it away, convinced it was going to shit on him one day as he was leaving the house for work. He blamed it on her mother's hanging flower baskets because they did often find small bird nests tucked amongst the petals. The first time it happened, her mother didn't notice until she'd already drowned the nest with water. Jasmine heard her exclamation of shock inside the house and ran out to see what was wrong. Jasmine remembers crying and trying to reach for the tiny blue eggs. After that, though, her mother continued to water them as normal, a move she argued that would teach the birds to stop coming. Olivia was so angry when Jasmine told her about this. She wouldn't come over to Jasmine's house for weeks. Lola was terrified of the roof bird, but unlike her father, who was afraid it would shit on him, Lola believed it would snatch them up in their sleep. She called it a walk-walk, a mythical vampire creature that hunts for the ill and dying. At least that's what came up when Jasmine Googled it. Lola couldn't explain the walk-walk very well in English. It's just a bird, Jasmine's mother used to exclaim every time Lola called her and her brother inside from playing, claiming she heard the flap of the walk-walk's wings. One evening, when her parents were out and Lola babysitting them, Jasmine helped her sprinkle salt around the doorways and windows of the house for protection. Later, from her bed, Jasmine heard her parents arguing in the living room about it. "What do you want me to do?" her father said. "She's an old woman. She has her superstitions." Jasmine had enjoyed puttering after Lola in her rain boots with a canister of Morton salt from the kitchen, spooning it wherever instructed. "There's salt in my carpets," her mother said. The bird is still perched on the line, observing her. Maybe it senses this affliction in her gut, the ache and the loss. Jasmine goes inside and rummages for the kosher salt but can't find any. She settles for a salt grinder full of coarse sea salt. She doesn't know if it makes a difference. She thinks of calling Lola to ask, but she gets easily confused over the phone, and Jasmine doesn't want to upset her. She doesn't look towards the neighbor's window again, uncaring if they watch her while she cracks salt in a line in front of her door. She feels the bird's eyes on her, though. "Walk, walk," she mutters to the bird, as if naming it so will send it away. "Go prey on someone else." Nothing happens. The next morning, though, there's an ambulance in the driveway, and she watches the neighbor's still body be hauled away on a stretcher, his wife following, her face morphed with grief. Their door stays open wide, the bearskin on the wall looks angry, or maybe happy. Olivia would know, Jasmine thinks. She looks to the power lines, but the bird is gone. Thanks.
Angelina, the young protagonist of Patsy Lally's novel manuscript, Broken Angel, is a survivor. Despite an abusive childhood, systems at every turn that fail her, Angelina is unflinching in her determination to save her baby brother from a similar childhood. It's Angelina's humor, gift for observation, and tenacity that carry her and the reader through this harrowing journey. Traits I believe the author shares as well. I can't wait to continue this journey with Patsy Lally. We have one more term to go. And I can't wait to see what Angelina has to do next. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Patsy Lally.
Thank you all. I'm glad that Molly didn't say either old or mature, because I'm here to tell you that age does not bestow maturity. Let's see how I can do this. So this is the beginning of Broken Angel. They named me Angelina. In Italian, it means little angel. I don't remember ever thinking of myself as a little angel. Just as well, because the year I turned 11, I became a soldier in the army of Christ. My little brother was born, and I murdered my father. Thinking back to 1956, to the beginning of those horrible events, they began on the day I called Fried Egg Day. I remember my father standing at the stove, cooking his favorite meal. I heard the sizzling of the eggs he'd broken into the frying pan, the smell of burning butter filling the room. At the kitchen table, my non-Italian, non-Catholic mother sat, hands tightly clasped, resting on her stomach. She stared straight ahead. Her usual pale pallor had an almost greenish tinge to it. I placed a glass of orange juice in front of her. She continued to stare at nothing. My father's favorite meal was 3 runny fried eggs, into which he would dip leftover Italian bread, the runny yolks softening the crumbling stale loaf. He would dip and slurp and crunch. I couldn't watch. The sounds were stomach-turning enough. My father carried his plate to the table and sat across from my mother. She kept her gaze over his head, avoiding the sight of his eating as much as I was. He began laughing and reached across the table to hold the plate under her nose. The eggs looked as if someone with a head cold missed his handkerchief, emptying his sinuses onto the plate. My mother took one glance, jumped up, knocked the plate to the floor, and ran into the bathroom, where we could hear her retching. "What the hell's the matter with you?" my father said. Silence. After a few moments, he turned to go downstairs, where my grandmother would happily make him more runny eggs. As he passed me, he punched the side of my head. "Go clean up the kitchen," he said. I looked down at the snot-covered kitchen floor, got the mop, and tried not to be sick myself. My mother came out of the bathroom and looked at my father's empty chair. We both knew he would now be down in his mother's kitchen, slurping away at a new plate of eggs. That was because just before Christmas, my father moved us to the top floor of his mother's brownstone in Brooklyn. His reason was that people were gossiping about my mother, and living under the eyes of her mother-in-law, they would see there was nothing to gossip about. I've often wondered if he ever had the smallest inkling that there was indeed something to gossip about. Now the 3 of us became 6. In the 3-level brownstone, my grandmother, Carmela, and 2 unmarried aunts, Lisabetta and Edita, lived in the basement kitchen and a middle floor with bedrooms. We lived in the 5 rooms on the top floor. My grandmother's kitchen smelled of garlic and spaghetti sauce. Our apartment smelled of cigarettes. My aunt Lisabetta was shy and quiet. I thought she was beautiful. Lisabetta was the repository of my childhood love no one else wanted. Edita, the older, wasn't really as ugly as the Wicked Witch of the West. Her spiteful personalities created a passing resemblance. Small, olive-toned skin, black hair pulled into a bun, unsmiling brown eyes that glared rather than looked, sharp elbows and fingers which could jab or pinch. There were no flying monkeys. I know because I checked. 3 taps on the radiator pipe was the signal Lisabetta and I used. It meant meet me on the stoop. I tapped. Lisabetta was already there when I came down. We sat close to keep our talks secret. "My mother's been crying. She's been throwing up," I said. "She's going to have a baby," Lisabetta answered. I gasped as if someone had punched me in the gut. This house of dark corners, secrets and cruelty. A baby didn't belong here. A baby would be in danger here. "How do you know?" "She has all the signs. We know she's pregnant for sure. Dr. Albano would have told us. He examines her all the time." At the mention of Dr. Albano, Lisabetta looked away. When we lived in the old apartment, he visited all the time. Now he didn't come as often, but a doctor would know. "No," I said, "God wouldn't do that." "A baby will be God's blessing," Lisabetta said. "This baby will have you and me. The baby will love us, you and me. What could be better?" How could she think that? She sees, she knows. Maybe we won't be enough. Looking at Lisabetta, I could see her face was lit from within. It was a face hardly wide enough to contain her smiles. I'd never seen her so overflowing with happiness and excitement. "Will be enough, I promise. It will be a beautiful baby. I'll make it my baby." Then she added, "And your baby too." Lisabetta went back inside. Alone on the cold stoop, I was reluctant to go back upstairs. It was March. I pulled my sweater more tightly. There was an elm tree in front of the house. I loved that tree. In my dreams, I was a bird that escaped, landing on its branches. Everyone else hated it because of the caterpillars that fell in early summer. No one ever saw butterflies. Not a bird, not a butterfly. I lived in a chrysalis which felt as if it would rot before it opened. Wanting to talk more to Lisabetta, I went to her room. Her attention was at something she held in her hands. When she realized I was at her door, she slid whatever it was under the doily on her dresser. My survival techniques were always at the ready. I knew to look past her, not acknowledging I had seen anything. Later, I would sneak back to see what it was. Okay, thank you.
Oof. I love those runny eggs. In the title story of Becky's collection, Fortunes Told, Becky Murray, I should say, just to clear it up, Madame Gianna reads 13-year-old Helen's palm. "Here it is," she says. "You, girlie, are an adventurer. You can't sit still, can you? I'll bet you're always getting in trouble for that." The women in Fortunes Told do not sit still. They do get in trouble. Lucky for us. There are women doing the hard work. These are women doing the hard work of discovering who they are and what they want, as opposed to who others want them to be. These stories are smart, moving, surprising, and funny. I feel so privileged to have worked with Becky and to have seen these stories evolve. I can't wait to see where her writing takes her next. It's my pleasure to introduce Becky Murray.
Hi, can you see me? Thank you so much for that, Molly. I have had a really wonderful time these last 2 years working with the fiction faculty. And I just want to say thank you all for being here, especially my family, my boys who have put up with a lot of this for the last 2 years, and my husband who's all picked up the slack. So thank you. The story I'm reading from is called Desert Terrace. It's about a woman in her early 40s who is a recovering alcoholic. And she goes to this memory care center every day called Desert Terrace to visit her mother who has Alzheimer's. And then also, when they were kids, she had a sister who died, which is somewhat important. So I was shocked the first time I visited my mom at Desert Terrace. I must have been so busy moving her in and signing waivers that I didn't notice the similarities between this place and the places I'd been. The automatic doors whooshed open and the air felt hot and stale. The smell was cheap cleaner. Everything, the walls, the tile, was either yellow or white, or maybe once white but now yellow. The fluorescent lights were dim, and it took time for my eyes to adjust. It reminded me of my first stint in rehab. It was a place with dirty yellow walls, a bleach scent, and dark hallways. Mom walked me as far as the intake desk. She signed paperwork and handed over her insurance card. The receptionist looked over the paperwork and then said, "Oops, looks like you forgot to put down emergency contact. Is that your number?" She nodded at Mom. "No," she said, "there won't be any emergencies." Then she turned to me. "I will be back when you're done. Do not call me before you finish treatment." She stared straight ahead, gave me a quick, tight hug, and left. The first night was torture. The blankets itched all over my skin. They had given me something with my dinner. It wasn't enough. I wanted to get up and get more, but I was too busy to stand. So instead, I counted the tiles on the ceiling. I rubbed my open palms flat against my sheets to slow down the tremors. I realized that even my sheets smelled of bleach and something burnt. I closed my eyes and prayed for dreams to pull me away, but none came. Rock bottom isn't really a thing. At least it wasn't for me. There was never a bottom. Alcohol's one hell of a solvent. If I had found a bottom, the alcohol would have eroded right through those rocks and sunk me even deeper. I didn't want to stop after my first DUI, or even after my third, when I couldn't drive anymore. I could make do with public transit. I would ride the town shuttle from bar to the liquor store and back home. I will tell you, though, now that I'm sober, public transit looks a lot different. Seems some of the most disgusting things imaginable riding that bus back and forth from the house to Desert Terrace. Sobering up is like waking up to find out you've been living in filth. There's a thick layer of grime over your entire life, and it's shameful to realize that you've never noticed it before. No plans this weekend? Mom asked me. It had been a mostly good day, but she was sundowning quick. The nurse walked in just then and set Mom's dinner tray in front of her. You have company tonight, Joyce. Enjoy. She gave me a wink and was gone. Who was that? Mom asked me. I think her name's Lydia. She's nice. I watched my mom poke at the gray meat in front of her. It was soft and looked boiled. Hey, do you remember when Dad would barbecue for us? Mom threw her head back with a silent laugh. Oh, yes, twice a year. He'd wear that stupid pink apron, and he thought he was so funny. He'd put it on and turn perfectly good meat into charcoal. What a talent. She clapped her hands, and I saw the light in her eyes. When I wonder why I keep coming to see her, if it would be easier to just let go, I remember this light, this flash of remembrance, the way she could laugh silently, and it changed the entire room. Remember the porch? I said. Oh, the porch. How could anyone forget? I could sit out there all evening in the summer and watch Harvey play with the kids. She smiled now like I remembered her smiling before, sort of half-cocked with just one dimple. She rarely smiled like this after the accident. We'd spend entire evenings out there. Harvey would chase the girls through the yard and around the swing set, and they'd laugh and laugh. Shaylin would squeal when he'd catch her. He'd put her high on his shoulders, and then she would laugh and raise her arm up. And then the smile was fading. My older girl would reach up for them, trying to grab Shay's foot. She was tall. Mom was frowning now. Her brow creased and made her entire face pull into itself. Her hands reached out in front of her like she could see the name but couldn't quite grasp it. Not Shay, my older girl. Melanie, I offered. I know, Mel. I know my own daughter's goddamn name, she snapped at me, knocking her tray over. The green water the beans were swimming in splashed at the back of my legs. Lydia popped her head in. Uh-oh, what happened in here? I'm done, Mom replied. And she was.
Wonderful, Becky. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Gregory Rollins. His poetry in his thesis, Chainsaw Mandala, is of this region and its lush ecology, drawing lyrical and thematic connections from Puget Sound, where he was raised, to La Grande, where he now lives. It's attuned to song and to sound, exploring the world and his own evolution through seminal bands and tunes, and mixing them into tales of family and family loss. There's melancholy at times, but more often there's an ecstatic joy, as in his poem today, Frau Trophäa, which tells the story of and embodies the dance of a woman in 1518 in the streets that lasted for weeks, I believe. It was my great pleasure to work with Gregory this spring, and our very good fortune to have him bring his particular and joyous dance to this community.
Thank you, Nick. That was great. And you were great. There's so many people to thank when a person finds themselves standing up here. So thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nancy Knowles. Thank you, classmates. Especially I'd like to dedicate this reading to Gabriel, my classmate. He was there from the outset and kind of convinced that my family hired him as a private investigator / angel. Sometimes angels wear blue glasses and drive electric cars. This first one is a short poem. It's called Still Life with Mirror. Most mornings, I wish for time's shining window balanced on tilted floor. I wish for something more than torn blinds and staring down the sun's barrel. Too much for the wildest moon and her weightless singing, unleashed and carefully feral. Also super hot. I feel like a hot dog in a sauna. This next one's dedicated to my dad and my brother. This is called The Fixed Closeness of Old Pilings. Dead end of summer lurches toward low tide. The rotten fists of Purdy Lagoon have risen to expose the warming grime. Through sword fern and salal, he tumbles to collapse, at last in our backyard, winded and barely conscious. My older brother is bloodied, his blue jeans torn, and the mall shirt he bought with lawn mowing cash irreparably stretched, too big now to fit his hunkered frame of sweat and sand. A friend of the neighbor boy had stomped up our cul-de-sac and mashed my brother's face into his own intimate earth. My brother, the coward, retreated. But instead of solace, it is our father at the front door, who listens to sobs, though spots some lacerating fog, impossible in the midday heat. The cloudless sky cut itself, and from the suture seeps the extract of thunder, one's own green blackberries plucked above a blonde yard. Dad grabbed him by the slacking collar, dragged him down the steps, and told him not to bother coming home if this is how you want to be treated for the rest of your life. I remember how honey-drenched the days were before, and how in a moment the honey boiled. It warped the windows and coated my brother in untouchable gold. By the time he reached the neighbor's fence to confront the bully, my brother was at a full sprint, his fists bouquets of strange obsidian. They disappeared into dust, and he didn't stop swinging until long after his victim was limp. Lumbering back, eyes fixed to the ground, like I'd seen him once after conquering Upper Lake Lena. Except here, he has no backpack, no flushed face of glass, nothing to say to any of us, and is weeping. This last poem is called The Joy of Meth, a maiden voyage. It wasn't a pipe you held to my lips so much as a little cracked egg of sun, snow angel harem afloat in the yolk. As flame drew close, I heard them moan, feathered claws on membrane wall, mad to dance the hallway of my throat. And when they did, my new eyes rolled. This weather system troop poised, slid beyond my mind's granite ridge. Arabesque en l'air with pink point shoes, a hydrant of cream streamed porcelain roses, sudden stampede of hollow chrome horses. Through sunken sockets, electrocuted lust, you looked on, those remaining teeth dangling from your gums like wet cereal. Your grin revealed a nostalgic envy, knowing, as you did, what's in store in the land of steel beds and sleeplessness. Ever after that disappearing train, bound for a city of condemned tenements. And yet, brother, instant lover, I am here. History is scrubbed, the future immaculate. Thank you.
Casey Zurmhal writes her characters directly into her readers' hearts so that we feel the beating and the bleeding and the breaking every bit as vividly as they do. She gives us not only the dollar stores, spent tires, and back roads of her small town worlds, but the sideways glances, the petty jealousies, and the secrets that persist in spaces where everyone knows everyone else's business. Casey writes women's grudges and resentments and gossips, but she writes their kindnesses too, their shifting loyalties, and their moments of grace. I'd like to introduce Casey Zermal. You are all in for a real treat.
Thanks, Claire. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to read from my thesis. It's a novel in progress, and it's called Tire Mountain. I won't get too much into that, but I do want to say the two scenes that I'm reading are told from the perspective of Ellie, who is 14 years old, and she's at a party with her friend Ronnie. And then the second scene, they're getting a ride home from a much older man. Okay, I think that's all you need to know. Ronnie says she'll be ready to leave in a few minutes, but I'm feeling hot, so I go outside for air that'll feel fresh on my face. I sit on the grass in the front yard. It's lush and thick and doesn't scratch my bare legs when I stretch them out long. All the grass on my street is wiry and thirsty, begging for someone to give it a little bit of love. Every year, Pa tried his darndest to keep our grass from drying. It rained well enough in the winter and spring, sure, and Pa did a good job of turning on the sprinklers once it started to get hot and dry. But as the summer would go on and temperatures rose to the sleep naked, dump ice water on your head, don't touch me, it's too hot kind of summer hot, he lost the will to keep on with the grass. Pa hated the heat and didn't fare well in it. He worked long hours at the steel mill where the air was tight and heavy. Then he'd come home to an inferno house and a wife who saved all her fighting words for him. Maybe it was the heat that put him over the edge, but every summer it seemed he shriveled away. And so there I would sit on the front porch in the one sliver of shade we had and watch the life fall from the grass and the life fall from him. And then as quickly as they died in the coming weeks and months, I would watch the life start to creep back in both of them. I remember waking up one late summer morning to Pa standing in the front lawn, a hose in one hand and a cigarette in the other. He was wearing the same thin robe he'd worn my entire life, gray and green flannel with broken tie loops. It was a part of the summer vacation where everyone was sick of it. Sick of the heat, of being bored, of living off popsicles, of dirty and scraped knees under cut-off shorts, sunburns, and camping. The town was sleepy and looking forward to the next bit of year. I brought my cereal out onto the front porch and watched as he watered every inch of that pea green and brown grass. When he saw me, he turned the hose on me just for a second. I squealed and kicked my legs and laughed, and then Pa laughed with his whole body, and I knew that fall was coming. There's a group of people at the back of the big red truck parked in the driveway. 3 girls are sitting in the bed and on the tailgate while 2 guys stand to face them. I watch from the yard, noticing the way the girls throw their heads back when they laugh, their big toothy laughs, and the way the guys look at each other like they know a secret the girls do not. 2 of them are wearing college sweatshirts. Washington State University, they say. It's crazy how just 1 hour away from Schaefer, people can look so different. And not in any kind of distinct way. At glance, we look the same. Our ancestors all came here looking for the same thing, but somewhere along the way, they found what they came looking for. And us? Well, I don't know. Maybe we're still out here searching. I lay on my back and look up at the stars. Tyler appears over me. He's holding Ronnie like you would hold a baby. Her legs are dangling over one of his arms and her head hangs heavy over the other. Come on, let's go, he says. She's hammered. I stare out my window while Tyler drives. There's nothing but farmland between Schaefer and Claxter. Acres and acres of green grass, wheat and apple orchards, old barns and new ones. There's tractors, combines and balers, big metal sprinklers and wire fencing. The moon is out big and round tonight, and it's lighting up everything in the distance. Do you think the moon is this big everywhere? I ask him. When the moon is out full like this tonight, does it look the same to everybody? I don't know, Tyler says. I think we're all the same distance to the moon. Shit, it's been a minute since I've been in school. I think it looks the same to everybody, I say. I think that when I'm looking at this big moon, there's other people just like me who are looking at this big moon. And I bet whatever I'm thinking, they're thinking too. I look down at Ronnie, who's snoring something fierce. I keep stroking her head. Want a cigarette? Tyler's holding out an open pack of yellow American spirits. Nah, I don't smoke, I say. And that's the truth. Seems everyone in Schaefer smokes, but I haven't taken to the habit. My pa used to smoke American spirits, I say with a little chuckle. Yeah? Where's your pa now? Dead, I say. Oh, shit. I'm sorry. How did that happen? An accident at the old steel mill 2 years ago. They shut it down right after. I think about Pa and the way he used to open his pack of smokes real slow, like it was something he was savoring. He'd pull on that little red tab at the top and peel away the plastic. I probably saw him do that 1,000 times. Mama says that Pa died with an American spirit in his mouth, but I don't know anything about that, seeing as how they probably don't let you smoke around all those chemicals at the steel mill. You know what? I say. I think I will take one of those smokes. I reach over and take one out of the box. Tyler hands me his lighter. I inhale, and at the end of the cigarette glows a red orange. I let the smoke fill my lungs and start coughing right away. You ever smoked before? Tyler asks, laughing. Sure I have, I say. It's just been a little while, that's all. I take another drag, but a small one this time, like the way Pa would do when he was in the middle of a funny story. I think about him. Why did he have to die the way he did? The hot chemicals burning through his skin while he screamed on the ground. His coworkers said that they'd never heard anyone howl the way he did. Sounded otherworldly, they told Mama the next day. She sat completely still in the living room, staring out the window while men she barely knew described the manner in which my pa had died. When they left, she picked up an unopened bottle of beer and chucked it at the window. I peeked my head around the corner and I watched her. The shattered glass resembled a spider web, the colors from outside shimmering sparkles through the cracks. My mind went to the kaleidoscope that Pa got me for my birthday a few years before. We're almost there, Tyler says. I take another drag from the cigarette. The smoke burns hot in my throat, and when I exhale, I watch it fly out the window and into the night. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those beautiful readings. They really fill me with inspiration and hope and pride. Let's take just a couple minutes if anyone needs to use the restroom, and then we'll get going with our short ceremony. Thank you. Okay. We're going to get going again. Thanks again for those amazing readings. And now Claire Boyle's going to start off the ceremony portion with a short reading.
Thank you all for those readings. That was such a delight to hear your words and your voices. It's been an honor to be part of the stage of your artistic lives, and I'm so proud of you. I know that so many of you did your MFA without funding. So many of you worked full-time. So many of you were raising children. And I remember very vividly what my MFA cost me. And so I have a sense of what it cost each of you, but I also know how much it's worth. Having managed like such a tremendous and wonderful and difficult thing can carry you through the inevitable moments of self-doubt and crises of confidence that come with your next step, which is building an artistic life for yourself after the MFA, which is also a tremendous and wonderful and difficult thing to do. It helps to keep writers you love close, the ones you've met here at EOU and the ones you admire from afar. And so to that end, I'm going to share some thoughts on writing from Lori Moore's book of essays, See What Can Be Done. And I've taken some truly shameless liberties with this to make it short enough. Writing is both the excursion into and the excursion out of one's life. That is the queasy paradox of the artistic life. It is the thing that, like love, removes one both painfully and deliciously from the ordinary shape of existence. It joins another queasy paradox that life is an amazing, hilarious, blessed gift, and that it is also intolerable. Even in the luckiest life, for example, one loves someone, and then that someone dies. This is not acceptable. This is a major design flaw, to say nothing of the world's truly calamitous lives. The imagination is meant outwardly to console us with all that is interesting, not so much to subtract, but to add to our lives. It reminds me of a progressive Italian elementary school I read of once, in which the classrooms had 2 dress-up areas with trunks of costumes, just in case, while studying math or plants, a child wanted to be in disguise that day. But the imagination also forces us inward. It constructs inwardly from what has entered our inwardness. The best art, especially literary art, embraces the very idea of paradox. It sees opposites, antitheses coexisting. It sees the blues and violets in the painting of an orange. It sees the scarlets and yellows in a bunch of Concord grapes. In narrative, tones share space, often queasily, the ironies quivering. What constitutes tragedy and what constitutes comedy may be a fuzzy matter. I often think of an acquaintance who is also a writer and whom I ran into once in a bookstore. We exchanged hellos, and when I asked her what she was working on these days, she said, "Well, I was working on a long comic novel, but then my husband had a terrible accident with an electric saw and lost 3 of his fingers. And it left us so sad and shaken that my comic novel kept getting droopier and sadder and depressing. So I scrapped it and started writing a novel about a man who loses 3 fingers in an accident with a saw. And that," she said, "that's turning out to be really funny." Obviously, one must keep a certain amount of literary faith and not be afraid to travel with one's work into margins and jungles and danger zones. And one should also live with someone who can cook and who will both be with one and leave one alone. But there is no formula to the life or to the work, and all any writer finally knows are the little decisions he or she has been forced to make given the particular choices. There's no golden recipe. Most things literary are as stubborn as colds. They resist all formulas, a chemist's, a wet nurse's, a magician's. There is no formula outside the sick devotion to the work. Perhaps one would be wise to even avoid thinking of oneself as a writer, for there's something a little stopped and satisfied, too healthy in that. Better to think of writing, of what one does as an activity rather than an identity. To write, I write, we write. To keep the calling a verb rather than a noun. To keep working at the thing at all hours, in all places, so that your life does not become a pose, a pornography of wishing. William Carlos Williams said, catch an eyeful, catch an earful, and don't drop what you've caught. Keep writing. We're in your corner. We cannot wait to see what you all do next.
Thank you, Claire. I'm now happy to bring back up Christopher Densmore for some opening student remarks.
All right. Peers, teachers, friends, family, classmates, thanks for being here today to take a little pause on this shoulder of ritual time to honor a couple of years of work, sometimes effortful, sometimes easeful. I don't really have anything particularly wise to offer or any kind of summarization that's for what I'm sure for all of us has been a diversely nourishing and difficult journey. Sometimes I imagine for more than just me, the making of art from words has felt like a font from outside the self, and sometimes it's also felt like a tearful, aching forging through creative blocks. Most of all, I suppose I'm grateful to have known that y'all are going through this with me, so thank you. I imagine some of you feel somewhat the same. It seems important also, in part because I totally neglected to when I came up here before, to offer thanks to all those of you who've supported us in your many roles. Some of you have fed and wrangled kids for those of us who have been spinning out on essays and stories and poems in the wee hours of the morning. And whether you're faculty or family members, your tenderness and patience with us as we've pursued these manic moments of magic and quiet story shaping has been received with the utmost love and gratitude. Again, thank you. While the pressures of achievement and ambition always linger in the culture, and while I honor all of our unique accomplishments, art is ultimately made in and for community. Thank you to everybody in this room for being a part of that community. I mostly want to leave you with a poem by a beloved writer. Before I do, I'm going to harangue my classmates into contributing to this little bit of thoughts and take a little moment of reflection and gratefulness on what these years have entailed. So I invite you and everybody to take 30 seconds of sort of silence, quiet, mindfully, and contemplate a couple words that you want to share with the room in the spirit of gratefulness about what this experience has meant to you. Speak from the heart. Let's take a breath. And be quiet for a little bit here. Feel what's going on in your body. Savor this moment. You're here. You made it. What comes up? Casey? Awesome. Thanks, y'all. I would just echo all of that. Y'all have worked super hard on refining your craft, and this sort of feels like an ending in some ways, but to echo the sentiments of Claire, it's also a beginning. This poem, which is by the Irish philosopher and spiritualist John O'Donohue, is called For the Artist at the Start of the Day. I think it speaks to process and opening our lives into creativity going forward. For the Artist at the Start of the Day, by John O'Donohue. May morning be astir with the harvest of night, your mind quickening to the eros of a new question, your eyes seduced by some unintended glimpse that cut right through the surface to a source. May this be a morning of innocent beginning, when the gift of you slips clear of the sticky web of the personal with its hurt and its hauntings and fixed fortress corners, a morning when you become a pure vessel for what wants to ascend from silence. May your imagination know the grace of perfect danger, to reach beyond imitation and the wheel of repetition, deep into the call of all the unfinished and unsolved, until the veil of the unknown yields and something original begins to stir toward your senses and grow stronger in your heart, in order to come to birth in a clean line of form that claims from time a rhythm not yet heard, that calls space to a different shape. May it be its own force field and dwell uniquely between the heart and the light, to surprise the hungry eye by how deftly it fits about its secret loss. Thank you all for your heartfelt preparation over these 2 years. Now is the start of the day. Metaphors be with you.
Thanks. That's a tough act to follow. I think hearing your testimony makes all this so much more worth it. I mean, it can't say it's not the most valuable thing that we already do, but it's wonderful to hear your perspective on the program and what it's offered you. You've heard a lot from me over the course of the week in various capacities, and I'm not sure I properly introduced myself to start. So I'm Nick Neely. I'm newly the director of the program, and I'm really excited to see where we're taking it together, and really led by our students and their dedication to their craft and to the program. I'll just share a few words. On Thursday, some of us got to hear briefly from the novelist, author Henry Hoke, whose new novel is called Open Throat. And it's a book we selected this year as an inaugural all-program common read. We got together Thursday afternoon to chat about it. It's a novel written from the perspective of a queer mountain lion, written in unpunctuated fragments that draw from the leaping power of poetry to render an animal consciousness, and often through simple observation it lands on pointed critiques of society. The book takes enormous risks, not just in rendering this consciousness, but in surrealist turns in which the narrator, the cat, is taken in by, say, a teenage girl and even dreams of a visit to Disneyland and a kind of magical ascendance to celebrity. Before the limits of human-animal relationships, or perhaps this strange dream of fame, surface again, and this dream shatters. Maybe I'm giving too much away, and I'll stop there, but I hope you'll read this book. It's a daring book, and it seems like it's being richly rewarded now, getting lots of attention and deserved readership. When we got to hear from Henry Hoke over Zoom, he shared some advice, which I'll paraphrase as always pursue your vision, make no concessions to your art, and follow your nose. And he said it much better than that and more charmingly. This was his 5th book, the first, as I understand it, to really become broadly visible, and his practice and attention to his singular vision is paying off in ways he never imagined and is now handling really, I think, quite humbly. Which brings me to this. In this and many other MFA programs, you've studied craft intensively, emulated others and each other consciously and unconsciously, and learned about certain conventions. You've also received at times a deluge of feedback on your work, a chorus of voices, all at once pushing you toward a general reader, a middle. All this is incredibly valuable, useful, and necessary, and it's critical to hear these voices during your MFA time. You'll continue to hear them in your head, and we'll continue to be here for you in support. But hopefully what your time in this MFA program has also taught you is that you must learn which of these voices to slowly or quickly tune out. You know what you need to listen to, what feeds you. You now have friends in the program who you trust with your work. And stick with these friends. Trust in your unique vision too. Don't chase a dream that isn't yours, a commercial dream, say, unless it's also a personal artistic dream. These are lessons that I think many artists are always, again, learning, and we are all in that together. Think of that as you continue to work on your theses and go forward in your writing. And if you want more words and feedback from us, we're here for you, and we hope you'll continue to come back to this week and other alumni events and help us continue to build this community. Thanks. It's now my pleasure to introduce our dean, Nathan Lau, who's over here. He is a huge supporter of the program. He's the dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences here at EOU. And really, I credit Nate for the existence of this program, and also for me being here to help guide us forward. Thank you, Nate.
I don't know what I can add. This is amazing. Thanks, students and faculty, and it's been quite a week. It's been magical. So, thanks, Nick, for all that you've put together and what everyone's contributed, and the words you all shared are inspiring. So yeah, thank you, Claire, for the reading, and thanks, Christopher, and I know Jensen, you're going to speak here in a minute as well. So thanks for those. I also just, from my perspective, want to take a minute to thank my college office staff, Cassie, Kayla, and Auburn. Maybe the students have interacted and faculty have interacted with them. They do a lot behind the scenes with Nick, so really grateful for their efforts, especially with all the planning that goes into this week, this event, Lit Week events, all the stuff that happens during the academic year. So really thankful and fortunate to have them. I don't know who deserves credit for penning this, but I've always been compelled by the stated mission of the program. In the MFA at Eastern Oregon University, we share a core belief that creative individuals are an underappreciated and underused resource. The creative makers among us have much to offer their communities, and we commit ourselves, therefore, to fostering that creativity. It is our belief, too, that finding community-based solutions to the real problems communities face can and should be a collaboration in which the creativity of artists and writers play a vital, enduring roles for enriching the lives of all. I'm incredibly proud to do my small part to nurture the intimate and supportive community of writers that make up our MFA, but the students and faculty are the ones doing most of the work together, at a distance, and in these short but deeply engaged residency experiences. What I witness and hear about those experiences and relationships, the faculty mentorship, the peer mentorship, reinforces my belief that when you intentionally build community, the rest will follow. The MFA and our partner Fish Trap are humble programs, but we desire to make an indelible impact on individuals by harnessing their writing and art making to bear witness in their communities. The programming that EOU and Fish Trap have created and have yet to envision and build together is aimed at increasing access to literature, humanities, and the arts programs for rural communities in Eastern Oregon. Our hope is that by creating more access and opportunity to what Fish Trap calls clear thinking and good writing in and about the West, our communities can find ways to address those most pressing regional and global issues, such as climate change, shifting agricultural economies and ecologies, environmental justice and social justice and racial justice, migration and displacement, the urban and rural divide, and water, to name just a few. We also deeply believe in and are committed to elevating the power of story and the value of storytelling, giving voice to individuals and their lived experiences. And haven't we experienced that last week and this week? Thank you especially to those of you graduating who read today. It's really inspiring. And the alumni who read last night, for the courage and artistry you bring to your writing and discovery of your own unique stories. That enriches all of us who are listening, opening more windows through which to see and try to understand the human condition. It makes us better humans. And over the years, the program has remained a welcoming refuge, a term a student once used in conversation with me, for individuals from myriad walks of life, from professional and academic backgrounds, living in urban and rural spaces, and with various ambitions and reasons for joining the MFA. I can't overstate the value this contributes to the program, to the peer-to-peer learning environment, to the community of writers. Thank you for being here, for challenging and nurturing each other, for your peer mentorship and building community. I know I've used this Wallace Stegner quote in the past. I hope folks aren't tired of it. But I'm reminded of it in the work that I do at EOU and in the region. It always pulls back up to the surface about this time of year when the writers descend on Wallowa Lake and La Grande. And I think about that MFA mission, and I think about an inspirational West. He writes, "One cannot be pessimistic about the West. This is the native home of hope. When it fully learns that cooperation, not rugged individualism, is the quality that most characterizes and preserves it, then it will have achieved itself and outlived its origins. Then it has a chance to create a society to match its scenery." So in these challenging political, social, environmental times where listening and empathy and cooperation feel threadbare, where will we find hope? Keep writing. Keep writing your story. Keep sharing your story with others. Keep listening to the stories of others. And to the 9 of you, wow, 9, that's phenomenal. The 9 of you who are graduating, we look forward to hearing about your successes, celebrating them within our community. Thank you for contributing 2 years of your life and your creativity to this community. Come back to participate anytime. Congratulations on completing the program and on finishing your thesis, though I too know well that odd feeling of accomplishment and regret. I promise it will pass. You just keep writing. We wish you the very best in your future endeavors. Go create a society to match its scenery. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nate. It's now showtime, the moment people have been waiting for, where we're going to hand out degrees. And we'll do that just by reading names, the title of the thesis, and the genre. And Dean Lau is going to help with the passing out of degrees, of diplomas. First, Gabriel H. Bomer, Major Mood Disorder, Poetry. Kristen Ariel Cariaga, Self-Talk in the Garden, Poetry. Rebecca M. Delore, At Night the Bird Sings, Nonfiction and Poetry. Christopher Dana Densmore, On Fire and Fruit, Essays in Grief and Abundance, Nonfiction. Jensen Heike, Not My Season, fiction. Patsy Lally, Broken Angel, fiction. Becky Murray, Fortunes Told and Other Stories, fiction. Gregory Rollins, Chainsaw Mandala, poetry. Casey's Merle, The Tire Mountain, fiction. Let's give one more round of applause for our graduates. Woo! And Jensen Heike has some closing remarks. Thank you, Jensen.
All right. Hi again, everybody. So when Nick asked me a couple of days ago if I'd be willing to do closing remarks, I admit I panicked a little bit. I felt like I was in one of those TV shows where the best man is frantically trying to write a speech using a best man speech for dummies the night before the wedding or something like that. So that was basically me, except for graduation speeches on Google. So what Google told me to do is to work a quote into it. So then I started Googling quotes about being a writer. And after reviewing a few articles, I settled on a quote by the writer Thomas Mann. And I haven't read any of his work, but I thought I'd quote him here to you today. He says, "A writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people." And I think perhaps my fellow graduates can relate to this quote. We've gone through this program for 2 years together now, and despite all the writing we've done, hundreds of pages and thousands of words, it can still be so hard for us to sit down and write. It's what we love to do, but we don't always want to do it, and the words don't always come easy. I admit this speech is the first thing I've written since submitting my thesis a few weeks ago. So despite the struggle and all the times we've needed to write but found it more difficult than doing anything else, we all made it here today. And we've dedicated a lot of time to doing this difficult thing, so I think that's something to be celebrated. And Eastern's MFA program is unique in that it's mostly online, except for this time we get to share together in the summer. A lot of us live in different places, and so we've stayed connected and we've gotten to know each other through our writing. And I remember one of my very first classes in the summer was with Melissa, and it was a nonfiction class, so that can get very personal and emotional when we're doing memoir work, and we were doing a lot of sharing, and I think every single one of us cried during that week or almost cried at some point. So that was sort of my introduction to this program. And I think writing programs are very intimate in that way, regardless of genre. Sharing your writing with your cohort requires a lot of vulnerability and trust. So I'm incredibly grateful to all of you for the joint giving and receiving we've been participating in these last 2 years, and I'll miss reading your words. So I hope we get to stay connected through our writing in the years to come. And in addition to my peers, I'll shout out the faculty one more time. I think I've had classes with a majority, except maybe for poetry, because I'm not much of a poet, but I'm sure the poets here can attest to your greatness as well. We're a small group, which means we get a lot of time and attention from the faculty. We get to go out for drinks with them, and we get to be friends with them. We get to hang out in gay bars together in Seattle and that sort of thing. The faculty make it clear that they care about us and they care about this program. In my 2 years here, I've seen it evolve and expand to allow new opportunities for students. I got to do things like work on the student newsletter and teach a virtual workshop, which were all really wonderful experiences. And now they're doing this great new Lit Week in La Grande, and I think for all of us, the summer trip to La Grande feels like tradition, and I understand why the alumni out there in the crowd keep coming back every year. And we really appreciate having you guys here every year, and I'm sure we'll probably be with them next year. So closing out my remarks now, according to Google, I should probably touch back on my quote from Thomas Mann about writing being difficult and writers finding it difficult. We're all writers graduating here today, and we might feel a little lost stepping away from the program and out into the real world where there aren't any deadlines or prompts or required reading lists. It might, and I expect it probably will be difficult to keep writing, but it's what we're all meant to do. And I can say that because I've read all your work and I know how talented you all are. So keep writing even when it's difficult, because that's what makes you a writer, and writers are who we are. So congratulations to us all for finishing, and I'm sure in a few years we're all going to be invited back to LeGrand Lit Week to do readings from our published books. And so, yeah, I guess just one more round of applause for us all for graduating.
That was perfect, Jensen. Thank you so much. One more, I want to say one more round of applause, even though we just did. Let's do one more round. Woo! I'm thrilled to say that we have Garrett Hongo waiting in the wings, decorated Northwest poet memoirist, who's going to read from his new book, The Perfect Sound, and then be in conversation with Christopher Kondrich. Let's take 10 minutes. We're going to put Garrett's playlist related to the book on, and you all can celebrate, take some photos, and then we'll settle back into our seats and listen to Garrett. We're thrilled to have Garrett here. Cheers. Thank you all for being here. And I want to thank Garrett especially for his flexibility with the change of venue in light of the heat concerns at HQ where we're going to be later tonight. He's been very gracious about it. And we're so excited to have you here, Garrett. He's going to be in conversation with our own Christopher Condrich, who's here in the front. And so I'll introduce Christopher first, and then Garrett. Garrett's going to do a little reading, and then they'll have a conversation together. Christopher Condrich is the author of Valuing, selected by Jericho Brown as a winner of the National Poetry Series, as well as the book-length poem Contrapunto. His poetry and essays appear widely in places like the Kenyon Review, the New England Review, the Paris Review, and Plowshares. He's received fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, the Virginia Center of the Creative Arts, and the iPark Foundation, among others. We're very fortunate that he comes all the way from the East Coast to teach with us. Garrett Hongo was born in Volcano, Hawaii, and grew up there and in Los Angeles. He earned an MFA from the University of California, Irvine. His poetry collections are Yellow Light, The River of Heaven, which received the Lamont Poetry Prize and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and Coral Road, most recently Coral Road, over here on the table. In nonfiction, he has published The Mirror Diary and Volcano, a memoir of Hawaii, which won the Oregon Book Award in nonfiction. Today, he's with us to share his latest book, The Perfect Sound, a memoir in stereo, which, as the poet Yunt Huang says, ingeniously mixes personal memoir with cultural history and offers an indispensable guide for the search of acoustic truth. In the book, Garrett recounts the obsession with music and stereo that has been pivotal to the formation of his identity. His work has been recognized with fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts. He's a frequent contributor of audio articles to Soundstage, Ultra, and lives in Eugene, where he is distinguished professor at the University of Oregon. Garrett, thank you so much for being here today.
As I was muttering under my breath when I walked into the room, I see I've cleared it out. Sorry, I got it. Okay, how's that? Is that good? All right, it's live. All right. I thought I'd start by first thanking everyone for coming. You happy few, and thank Nick and the staff at the university for asking me to come. For all their hard work, you know, and for Nick particularly in donating so much administrative time to creating the place or the event and organizing, keeping it rolling. As a former administrator, my name is Garrett. Group, they're really, you know, gung-ho, they really went for it, and they're wonderful personalities, and they brought so much real response to the class. It was a pleasure. So I want to read this first poem for them. It's something that, I guess I'm going to just be reading, to let you know, I'm going to just be reading two poems, one at the beginning, one at the end. And they're not collected yet. They're from my forthcoming book, which is super forthcoming in 2025. So I'm going to read just those two poems from that. Do I have a table or something? No. No, it's not. This is flashback. This first one, I was teaching, what you call it, a thing called the itinerary. And it has to do with the long tradition in Anglophone poetry, which is to say poetry in English, from the 17th century. And but its main practitioners were the English Romantics, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, and the like. Keats himself actually didn't expressly practice this form, but he knew of it, of course. So I want to read my own, if I can find it, itinerary, and I want to read for the students in the class. You know, rather than fumble around, are any of my students here? Do you have the handout? Yeah. Let me have the handout. Because I have a table of contents, but it's, there we go. Yeah, I want that back. This is a poem called Garland of Light. Can you hear me? It's written to the memory of Robert Hayden, one of my own early teachers, who gave me so much and more than I realized at the moment, and more than I realized for many years. I hope you try to read his poetry. His most famous poem, of course, is called Those Winter Sundays. This also happens to be a favorite poem of our President Joe Biden. In memory of Robert Hayden, I had taken a long walk from my hotel near the Coliseum, past the antique earth colors of ruins at the Forum, down busy traffic-laden streets to the Trevi Fountain, its lip ringed with throngs of tourists snapping selfies. A father bending to the waters and cupping his hands to offer his toddler son a cool drink amidst the glister. Sculptures of the gods, serene but spouting in abundance, that lap gorgeously over carved stone, to the brilliant cooling fan that made this upwelling a semicircle of the bucolic. I moved through a kind of winding approach to the steps and descended, peeking through the patches of crowds huddled in angling shade by the Keats Shelley House. On the street before the fountaining Bernini boat in the piazza, I button-hooked into the entrance and climbed wooden stairs, paid my fee to the smiling attendant, and entered the sacred rooms, a kind of library with long walls lined with books, busts of Keats and Shelley, glass cases of miscellaneous manuscripts, wispy locks of their tawny hair, other small trinkets of their lives. In Severn's room, a small chamber adjacent to where Keats died, I found a printed card and read the words of Charles Cowden Clarke, Keats' boyhood friend, telling how, after the poet had left Enfield School to apprentice to an apothecary at a village 2 miles away, they'd still meet 5 to 6 times a month, Keats with book in hand, so they might sit at an arbor at the edge of a spacious garden to while away a leisure hour with good talk of the Fairy Queen, to note the spark that fired the train of his poetical tendencies. But a reflection on the glass shone through the transparency of years, a frosted flame of thought that took me back through the inactive pages of my life, and I was humbled to recall my own student time, 23 in Ann Arbor, fresh from Japan and my monastery year, sitting with Robert Hayden in his garden. It was fall term, and I pursued him, asking for conference hours. He dismissed all my suggestions and simply said, "We shall read Keats," invited me to have tea every Monday afternoon at his house. I'd ride a borrowed woman's swing, my books in a wicker basket, and he'd be there, reading on his porch, rising to greet me like a street lamp blooming over autumn blossoms, Coke bottle glasses gleaming at their rims, red or yellow bow tie at his wrinkled neck, the white dress shirt flapping lightly in the breeze like drying laundry, his hair brilliantine and scented with a light floral trace. I never took one note, instead listened intently to his pure voice, murmuring the great lines, as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. 1 minute passed and Leithward had sunk in some melodious plot of beechen green and shadows numberless. While the garden swam in flurries of light around us, white gladiolas, tumbles of trumpet blossoms, a vine of wisteria yet to bloom, snarling over a dingy trellis, shading the gate. He taught me rhythm, phrasing, attention for metaphor, the organic and spectral weave of syntax coiling to simile, design all in shadow until the burst that reveals the shining figure alit with clarified thought, tasting of flora and the country green, the deep, delved earth, dance and Provençal song, and sunburnt mirth. The man who, in his own poems, told of slave ships, rebellions, great leaders of his race, El Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, chronic angers, and love's obscure and lonely offices. What did I know? And did I know that his gift to me was a mirror of mutual affections refracted through the burbling hippocrene from over a century before, when vows once spoken between two friends remain like crimson dyed in grain, and darkening I listen through the pastoral eglantine, my heathen soul fast unto thy chastening. Who was this man who ascends like a breath amidst the roar of years, who gave me the utter sound of words like a water-rich script, rolling gently as a garland of light on the swells of a fountain? This is my third time to the Grand. I've been in Oregon 32 years, and it seems like every 10 I get an invitation to come. But this is the first time I drove here. I was astonished to find out that you can't fly from Eugene to here anymore. So I made this drive, and it was interminably long, but also astonishingly beautiful. You got the feel of the continent, you know, which is a good thing. That beautiful Columbia and the gorge, and then making the round to the desert that's here. I guess it's Eastern Oregon, they say, right? Which hardly suffices, does it? Let's call it the Eastern Shore of Oregon. My memoir is a book that's hard for readers, bookstores, and most critics, even my publisher, to wrap their arms around, because it's kind of a compendium. It's called a memoir because the marketing team didn't like my subtitle. I was going to call it an autobiography in stereo, harking back to the, the autobiography of Henry Adams, Benjamin Franklin. Of course, none of these marketing folk, maybe my editor, has read Benjamin Franklin or Henry Adams, or even Gertrude Stein for that matter. I mean, one realizes, especially after last week's news, about the, let's say, that axing of many old-time editors at Knopf, especially, that literature hardly matters in publishing nowadays. But still, they're stuck with me, aren't they? It's ostensible kickoff is trying to build a stereo system after I get back from La Scala and seeing a performance of La Boheme in 2005, which transported me, in fact, changed my life. Because I really didn't know opera at all. I'd gone to a couple, one in LA, La Nozze di Fio, and then one in DC, and I can't even remember what it was in DC. Both horrid places to see opera. You just can't do it. Even a great house like the Chicago Lyric, which has beautiful acoustics. I mean, you're like in the right field bleachers, trying to listen to like Linda Georgiou sing an aria from La Traviata. It's just weird, you know. But in Milan, in La Scala, the orchestra is in your lap. The singers are right in your face. It's extremely intimate. It's acoustic. It's analog. You know what I mean? And it was so moving and so beautiful. Of course, the story of La Boheme is about artists in the Latin Quarter of Paris struggling to make it, and through a winter of illness and poverty. It was very moving to me. It reminded me of my early years, only full of dedication, aspiration, devotion to my elders. Frankly, little hope, but still, despite that, trying to become a poet. It was very moving. And I thought, Jesus, I got to have more of this in my life. I got to listen to opera every day. I've got to practice like prayers, like morning sutras every morning. But my stereo system didn't cooperate. It like totally died. It ate my CDs and coughing and burning and everything. And then I tried to build a system, and nothing worked. It all sounded terrible. It was like a cat trying to spin up a hairball, And I'd go to stereo stores and talk to the salespeople, and they'd say, "Oh, this one is $450. This is $1,000. This is $2,500, and it'll do this and it'll do that." And I'd say, "You want to take it home?" I'd go, "Oh, why don't you let me take it home?" "Yeah, I got to try." Put it in, and couldn't play. I figured out that all the equipment today is designed to play shit music. Kind most people listen to, like, I don't know what it is, electronica, even rock, or even jazz. Not that kind of shit. The problem is the sustained beauty of the operatic voice. It does not stop. It's like relentless, because they sing in one breath. It's a continuous line of sound. And what that does is that the amplifiers just wimp out. They don't have enough storage capacity and power to sustain the note, so they start distorting. Electric guitars, like Jimi Hendrix, is like this. It's just a flash of sound. And then the system in that nanosecond recovers. Well, so essentially, modern electronic audio equipment can't is play real music that was meant by human voices to fall upon human ears. Now, isn't that astonishing? But that's true. So it took me like 2.5 years to figure out how to get this done. I got it done. This is sort of the chronicle of it on the one hand. That's one channel of the story. The other channel of the story is my involvement with music throughout my life. I'm a failed musician. My mother discovered that I tested well when I was 10 and took me out of all my music lessons, on all the art curriculum, took away the guitar, took away my electric guitar, took away the piano. Then I was forced to study science and math, throughout. And so by the time I got to college, there were all these great musicians among my classmates, cellists, singers, and pianists. And of course, they'd been studying since they were all little kids. I could never catch up, but I loved the music. Anyway, so it's about my love of music throughout my life, which includes, classical, but also Hawaiian and rock and roll. The last thing I'll tell you, and I'm not going to read from that section, it's about my love for my father, who I discovered when I was building my stereo system. I had all these flashes of recollection came to me, remembering that when I was 10 and 11, my father built his own home stereo systems with do-it-yourself kits he got in the mail, Heath kit, Dyna kit, that kind of thing. He was one of those guys that came back from World War II and went to college on the Texas trade school actually, on the GI Bill. And when he finally reached the point of middle class prosperity, which meant a tract home in San Fernando Valley, he decided to build a stereo because he wanted to hear his music. It was all big band stuff and Hawaiian hotel music. And I realized as I was remembering all these things that he must have done it so he could hear his music for the last time, because his hearing was steadily degrading ever since he was a child, and then as an infantryman in World War II, and then as a construction worker on the Kaneohe Marine Base, which has an airstrip. And I just thought what a noble and peaceful thing to want to do for a person, and I loved him even more. So here's what I'm going to read. I'm going to read a section of the book that is about first love, actually, and first love in music, in a way, first love in relationships. Okay. It's sort of self-explanatory. I'll just read it. It was, I think it was published in the Georgia Review as, they call it slow dance music. So let's see if I can do that here. It's scattered a bit. This is just after an event where I get criticized for listening to white music when I was in high school. I went to a high school in South Bay, LA, which was a third black, a third Japanese American, and a third white. We were supposed to be the first integrated school in LA, but it was self-segregating within. It did. And as a kid, having grown up in Hawaii, I just didn't vibe with that, and I kept crossing and kept getting in trouble. So, I hang out with the black kids, particularly on the football team. I had Chicano friends. All this was uncool by Japanese American standards. So I was listening to Buffalo Springfield, and people were giving me shit. So this is in response to that. About the same time, I'd grown bored with most of my classmates, and reciprocally, they'd gotten completely sick of me. I was reading The Atlantic and The Nation, looking for explanations about our changing national culture, which was full of unrest. Vietnam was going on, there had been student protests at Berkeley and Columbia, and race riots had inflamed our inner cities across this country, starting with Watts, just a few miles away from Gardena. I seen the smoke from my rooftop when I was 13. My classmates were still focused on dances and the football team, college entrance exams, and keeping their noses clean so they could move up into the economic and social niches their parents expected them to. Recently, a classmate told me that I yelled at a pretty Japanese girl for being petty and politically ignorant when she tried to solicit me for some kind of club raffle the day after Robert Kennedy was assassinated. I was told I pounded a Japanese guy's head into a locker after he taunted me for singing Sileto Lindo in the hallways. I must have been imitating the I and yodeling of the Mexican singer who recorded it, intoning the polka-influenced verses about a lovely lady with dark eyes. I could have been singing it because I'd gone to a Mexican dance over the weekend, dressing like a Pachuco. Actually, my friend Philip Pacheco lives in Pendleton, or Joseph, the guy I'm writing about. They're dressing like a Pachuco, slicking back my hair with tres flores, wearing high-water gabardine slacks with billowing pant legs, black high-top shoes, a tight-fitting maroon shirt, and a borrowed, broad-shouldered black jacket of a long and stylish cut. I was seeing Alina, a pretty Greek-American girl who sat in front of me junior year in creative writing class, and we couldn't hang out at the segregated dances for white kids or Japanese. We were known too well, and racial mixing was strictly taboo. Our friend Felipe Pacheco, a gay Chicano who sat across from me in class, suggested we go with him to a Mexican dance in his neighborhood. He'd coach us on what to wear, how to dance, and we'd have a good time on his turf, more open and without the social segregations of white or Japanese culture that prohibited us from dating. Alina was a vivacious and good talker, not to mention a beauty. I saw her as a teenage Lauren Bacall. Little did I know that Lauren Bacall was teenage, but she first hit the movies. Full of quips and anecdotes about her life. She spoke easily about paperback novels she had read. Books like Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Thomas Berger's Little Big Man, and Joseph Heller's Cat-22. She found them in her mother's beauty shop while sweeping up and closing the place. They were left by customers, culled by her from a ragtag library of westerns, mysteries, and bodice rippers. We talked all the time because our teacher, who was retiring after that year, Pete announced it, was checked out, telling us we could do anything we wanted so long as we kept it down and didn't rely on him while he studied his chess methods. Alina spun around one day, straying her long, glossy, light caramel hair in a whirl in front of me, taking my breath away, and slapped a paperback book down on my desk. "Here, read this," she said, commanding me. "The guys in here are a lot like you. You're both McMurphy and the Chief rolled into one." It was Kesey's novel set in a mental hospital, but it had not yet been made into the famous film starring Jack Nicholson. It was a challenge, and I accepted it, reading Kesey's book over the weekend, then talking to Alina all the week long thereafter. She handed me more and more novels to read as the term wore on, schooling me in double ways with increments of literature and the engagingly proffered romance I began to anticipate would be ours. I got to hanging out at Alina's house after school. We sat on a pebble grain fabric couch, and she'd play records as she brought out a bowl of chips. She had an eclectic collection, 45 singles of the Righteous Brothers, Beach Boys, and Beatles. I remember listening to Dusty Springfield too, but the records that stuck out in memory were by the Zombies, a British rock group from the mid-60s, from London, but obviously influenced by the Mersey beat sound, the Beatles, Jerry the Pacemakers, et al. The Zombies had hits like She's Not There and Tell Her No, love ballads of lament and rejection, in the clear nasal tenor voice of the lead singer, backed by tight vocal harmonies, heavy beats, a melodic bass, and busy keyboard work from the rest of the band. Alina had a lot of their records, not just their hits. Singles that her older brother, a soldier stationed in England, had brought back on trips home. A lot of these were terrific covers of American blues and R&B. Chicago blues master Muddy Waters' Got My Mojo Working, Going Out of My Head by crooners Little Anthony and the Imperials, and It's So Hard to Lie by the Isley Brothers, a soul group highly favorite among my crowd of Japanese kids. She loved these and seemed completely innocent of issues like the race crossing and cultural mimicry that these sides raised in my own mind. So I never went there when we talked and stayed hanging out. Mojo Working played on repeat in the background, the Zombies cranking in a jumbled herpy style like Manfred Mann and his men, while we got busy. Alina had a way of unhooking her bra under her knit blouse, reaching back with one arm, sliding the rig around, and with a grin, pulling it out from under like a rubber chicken yanked from a top hat. It was thrilling. But though she let me fumble around in there, my hands groping and pinballing with her plush breasts, my arms hitching the lower hem of her blouse up to her heaving belly, she never took her top off all the way, no matter how passionately she seemed to sigh and writhe under my caresses. It made me crazy, and maybe made her crazy too, both of us fumbling to enact the script written from 60s fantasies about the opposite sex. No, I'm going to read the part that I was just going to skip, because it's pretty good. I worked up an especially obscene lather one afternoon when Alina's father, home from work early, walked in on us. The music was turned up so loud, I guess, we didn't hear his pickup pulling into the driveway, or even his door key working the lock. When he came in, the whole house seemed to take in a breath, while her father stood for a second at the entryway. He saw what we were doing, the zombies still working their mojo, then snapped his head aside, looking past us, and walked straight through the living room toward the back of the house. I was frozen, immobilized in my ardor, abashed and still rigid under my school slacks. But Alina, calm and more experienced than me, sat up, straightened and smoothed her knit top, twisted her slim hips, then leaned down and put her unflustered face in front of mine, commanding me to wait here. She didn't bother getting her bra back on. It had been thrown limply and now was spread out like a dead, beige-colored octopus on the floor. She walked over to the kitchen, bouncing and shifting freely under her top. I heard the freezer door open, then a rattle and a crunch, a ceramic tinkling, and a tap opening and water running. She came back to me with a wide-mouthed, rubberized bag that looked like an inflated shower cap. It was bulging with ice, and handed it to me saying, "Here, put this on, Mr. Johnson, and you'll calm down." I did as I was told, icing myself. Her father called to me from the kitchen then, scraping a dining chair along the floor. He'd taken a seat at their Formica table. I hesitated a moment, looking down at myself, handed Alina the ice bag, and stood up. There was a cool dampness on the front of my pants. There was a dark, spreading circle straddling each side of my fly. Water had leaked from the faulty bag and onto the fabric, and fool that I was, I hadn't noticed it for all the chill I'd been desperately applying to myself. "Son, are you coming?" her father asked. I had no option but to walk in there, hands draped along my sides, wanting to cover up. Yet how could I? There was no decorous way, and the little voice inside me kept yelling, "It's not what you think, not what you think, not what you think at all." But I stood there, hangdog, and silent by the frayed entryway to the kitchen, waiting to face the music. Her father was a huge man, obese and blubbery under his work clothes, a long-sleeved shirt over thick poplin slacks, and I imagined him, in God's rage, swallowing my whole body in the folds of his flesh. But he was acting oddly calm, even friendly. He offered me a beer, which I meekly declined, staring at the floor, not wanting to meet his eyes. He called for Alina to come help him with his tools, and she scurried behind me into a bathroom down a hall next to the kitchen. And under the sound of the zombie still working in the mojo, I could hear her rattling a few bottles in a medicine cabinet. She brought back a package of gauze bandages and a hypodermic needle, placing them all on the dining table in front of her father, where there was already a small glass bottle with a clear fluid in it. He started taking his shirt off in front of me, asking at first if I minded, but I knew it was useless to protest. He lay back in the frail dining chair I thought would buckle under his weight, stretching his belly to its full expanse. Then he got it all going, popping a new needle for the hypodermic with his teeth, attaching it to the nose end of the hypodermic, dipping the needle through the rubber cap on the bottle of insulin, then stabbing himself, the needle jerking into his roll of belly fat. He pushed the plunger quickly and extracted the needle, seemingly in one motion. This exposed a little bead of blood at the injection site. Alina tore open a paper package, plucked a square piece of gauze from it, and handed it to him so he could dab himself. You know why we live here in Gardena, son, he said, speaking in a voice thickened with age and strain, and without any hint of the rage I had expected. Because we admire the Japanese-American people. It was the first time I ever heard anyone white use that particular locution when speaking about us, and I was astonished. Usually we referred to as Japanese, making no distinction between us and Japanese nationals, Orientals, or worse, as Japs, if the speaker carried prejudice from World War II times. Our black schoolmates called us Buddha heads, picking up the term from our fathers who had served in the U.S. Army with their fathers. It came from Hawaiian Japanese and was originally pronounced Buddha head, meaning pig-headed, referring to immigrant field workers so stupid and resolute that hard labor never daunted them. We moved here from Texas as soon as I was well enough, Alina's father said. I was wounded in a battle in France, and my whole battalion got trapped by the Germans up in this forest, cut off from the rest of the regiment. It was freezing, and you couldn't tell if a crack was from a rifle or the limb of a tree snapping off somewhere. We were given up for lost by command and thought, well, this is it, boys. Better make your peace. We were getting picked off, one by one, losing GIs all over the place, hunched down on hard ground that we couldn't dig into. No foxholes. Machine guns pinned us down, and sniper rounds would smack into your bodies left and right, all along the line. Most was dead before they could say anything. I was so scared I pissed my pants, kind of like the cun he'd done right there. He gestured with spreading sargasso on my fly. Well, son, guess what? First a squad of Nisi boys came up, then another, just 2 or 3 guys each, and pretty soon what was up to the whole battalion came to our position. That was the 442. You know who they were, don't you? Alina's father had been one of 275 soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 36th Infantry Division from Texas, called the Lost Battalion, for having been encircled by the German army in the Vosges Mountains near the border of Germany. On October 24th, 1944, the All-Nisei 442nd Regimental Combat Team suffered over 800 casualties in a battle that rescued the 211 surviving soldiers from Texas. Alina's father's eyes were warm, his voice so calming, but I could only answer stiffly. I said, "Thank you for telling me your story, sir." I made some kind of excuse, but I had to go. I withdrew quickly, trying not to catch Alina's eye, bowing my head as I pulled open the front door, then pushed on the screen one, finally stumbling down the painted concrete steps of the house. As I walked away, my soggy fly feeling cool against my crotch in the light afternoon wind. A strange mix of things flooded through me. The frustration in my loins, the thrumming panic in my soul, soothed at disaster averted, stray tears, and a kind of mixed grief and gratitude for the strange and intense recognition that Alina's father had bestowed upon me. It was all rivering through my body, a sticky flotsam of race, arousal, legacy, and music. No one had ever told me about it. true. But I've avoided sending any part of this book to her. Because, like I said, we're still friends. So I'm basically a chicken shit, you know? How's my time?
You're good.
About how much do I have left?
If you want to read another poem, we would love that.
All right. Let's see if I can find the poem. Maybe I'll read two. You don't mind?
No.
How could you say no? How could you say yes, he doesn't? Now let's see if I can find it. It's a pretty recent poem. I wrote it this past spring, and it served as a kind of bridge in the text of a book I thought I'd finished last summer in France, actually. But it really still needed something, so I wrote this poem. It's called Litter for the Taking. Some of you may have read it in the magazines. My dream life started in LA's concrete world, a cityscape of cheap apartments and palm trees, crowned asphalt streets, blacktop playgrounds of swirled immigrant black and Asian kids, a wheeze of asthma in my chest, missing Hawaii and my playmate cousins, a sighing seashore that had, in foaming curls of white stories, given a pastoral and all its lore to paint my daydreams, vanish distress, and bring back the lost words of pitching waves, itinerant summers of kulolo and fish, evenings of porch music and windward rains. I had these the way Muir had his Sierras, a splendor alive in all my waking, a green mural of folded cliffs, plumeria blooms on the patchy lawns, litter for the taking. Throughout childhood, I had my secret place, a splendor of mine amid urban squalor, palimpsests of imaginings to trace, while a car wreck screeched from the corner. I conjured yellow hollow flowers, tofu shops, fish hooks baited with pink shrimp in waters tumbled from mossy stones, slate bells of clouds, the rippled silk of trade winds in blue tatters, woven across the lagoon's upturned face. A shut-in latchkey kid after school, I made games of cardboard, string. A sheet of foil was a silver pond where white egrets raced. I've since taken survey of other lands, parades of volcanoes, museum halls. I lived for pleasures that came to hand the way sea-run fish schooled by a waterfall. I learned of purple wines and their terroir. I gathered postcards at a stop and go. I hiked along a narrow road one summer, chasing the ghosts of Sora and Basho. Another, my daughter ran on cobblestones down a winding Kafkaesque street in Prague. Alarmed, just 5, she found herself alone while I strolled ahead, my mind in a fog. It moved back, at work on a fantasy, something to do with Florentine lunettes, or a late spring snow at Kinkakuji, a lace chain of smoke from a cigarette. Imitations are what I'd sought, innocence I had as though a child's, a saint's chorus, unaging wonders taken from guidebooks that might beguile and blaze to magnificence. A copse of oaks, a lawn of fallen umber leaves, our refuge. My home is now my nation. Walls of Chinese art, rugs of Turkish weave. I'm content with quieter intimations. What do I do these days of idleness? Fugitive thoughts pitch up, the mind's coronas. An affair among redwoods in Inverness, a summer shower, ponds gold-lit in Laguna. From memory, phantoms and their auras. It's as though I took a road up mountain, through fog, for watercress near Waimea. Wham on the radio. and steady rain, while I dreamt an image, an idea that gave a moment's comfort when it came. I'm not done yet. I'm going to do one last one. I wrote that poem to Eugene last spring and sent it in the manuscript I thought was finished to my editor. I told the story in a longer version to the students in the workshop this morning. I liked a title, I gave her the title. She didn't like that title, she had her own title. The title she wanted was taking the title of a long sequence at the end of the book, which was written in Cassis, France. It's the south of France, it's like a resort. Beautiful place. And I had an apartment that's right on the Mediterranean, extremely cool. And I thought for the finish of the book there, what did I call the book? I call the sequence I wrote, which is coming out in the magazine, Surfaces of the Sea. Knowing full well that it alluded slightly to the Wallace Stevens poem, Sea Surfaces from the Clouds. And so my editor, she horrified me by proposing that as the title of the book. And I thought, I can't call the book that. I was going to think of, Wallace Stevens. Because I do make a little joke about Stevens in the book, about that poem, and my best friend said, you can't call it that, Wallace Stevens. My other best friend said, you can't call it that, Wallace Stevens. And another, guy said, no, Wallace Stevens. These are three, master poets, one in Minnesota, one in New York, and one in Nashville, Tennessee. They all agreed, no, Wallace Stevens. But she was, adamant, and I thought, okay, I can't go against my editor, because you know how things are in publishing things. You cannot, look a gift horse, right? Look, I have a publisher, you idiot. Keep your mouth shut. I like to sort of fume. And then my friend in New York called me and said, you know what? Maybe you and I and maybe a few others are the only ones who are going to realize that there's an allusion to Stevens in that phrase. Because nobody reads Stevens anymore, not even our editor. He doesn't say that. I thought he's right. You kids today don't goddamn read any poetry before 1989. Even that. So, okay, we'll call it that. Okay. But it bothered me. I was in Paris in June and July, writing an essay, a tribute to an early mentor of mine who passed away. And worked on it all month. I liked the way it came out. And then I finished early. I had 5 days left in Paris. I didn't know what to do because I don't like being a tourist too much. I just like being in Paris, being able to ride all day and then hit the streets, find a cafe or a bistro, and just hang. Everything's so alive. You can just walk down the street and good shit happens, right? Not like Oregon. You got to drive 1,800 miles to do anything. Well, I'll write portraits. I'll write poems. So I started, fussing around, and then this happened. This is called An Ocean of Clouds. I sing for clouds. Oh, by the way, I've never read this to anybody. This is the first time I'm ever reading it aloud. I sing for clouds, constant rains, a fern chorus of things forgotten, ginger flowers of sadness my mother bore, enormous hollows of my family's past. My father, the dutiful son, come to run the store by the volcano, called by his father, promising a new life, its open door that swung shut after barely a year. They left me still a newborn in their arms, wailing in complaint for the swift travel, headed to Kahuku, their new truck farms, old plantation, and its steel sugar castle. I grew to 6 there, a boy barefoot on dirt and gravel roads, green temple moss by the graveyard, There were shorebirds in suits of slanting rain, a gray-brown surf, pebble-tossed, not fit for swimming, a tired sand-spit striff that marked the margin of all our dreaming. And what was that? The green folds of cliffs chanted our imagined names, caught winds heaving an ocean of clouds that piled like sea wrap, muffling the mill's whistle, windrows of rain, gathered upon the mountain's emerald stacks, the black crown of the day's celebration. Hidden within the sighing sugar cane, here I first raised my voice in harmless praise. I lifted my eyes to the moon's white sphere and sang a song I hoped would bless all my days. I sent to my other friend, and she gave in. She says, that's the title poem. I win. Thank you all for staying and listening.
You're up for questions from
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, we'll do set. I'm assuming this is for me.
No, I'll do that. So just hold in over there.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me? All right? Okay. Garrett, thank you so much for that really wonderful reading. And I'm so happy that you read some new poems alongside an excerpt from the new memoir, autobiography. We'll get to the poems in a couple minutes, and I also want to ask you about the interplay between genres. But I thought I would just ask you about how you knew that this was going to be the idea for your autobiography, right? Because the book starts out with you just wanting to, as you were saying before, just wanting to get a CD system that would play opera, right? But you take a pretty deep dive into audio equipment, and as deep as you dive into that, the scope of your writing, of the perfect sound, really widens out into memory, into excerpts like the one that you read today. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that evolution, and at what point did you think that this would be the idea for the book?
Well, I actually have a very practical answer. What I discovered was, at one point, I had been reading magazines and online and stuff, that vacuum tubes reproduced sound differently, of course, than solid state, which is what most of the equipment is today, which is to say transistors. Transistors took over the audio business in the 70s, but vacuum tube technology and stereo systems were kept alive by aficionados in Japan who preferred sound for very specific aesthetic reasons, which were not important to most Americans, particularly not to American corporations, because they could sell a lot of solid-state equipment. Also in France and Italy, these places that prize like food, like real food. You go, like Italy, anything is good, no matter what. It's the same thing with packaged food. It's great. It's one reason to go to Paris. It's food. I didn't have a bad meal. Which is I don't know if you can say that in a brand. You can certainly say that about Northbrook, Massachusetts. Every meal is bad there. But I had to spend a day and a half there this past spring. My daughter loved it. I hated it. Anyway, vacuum tubes was touted as much more organic, much more natural. And I thought, it's got to be better than this shit. You know, I had a French solid-state amplifier. I had a Norwegian solid-state amplifier. I had a British solid-state amplifier. Trying to think, I tried a British solid-state amplifier. And they just couldn't really play the music. You know, violins sounded like plumbing systems. You know, when they whistle, you know. And then operatic voices, like I said, sound like a cat trying to spit up an air ball. So I started coveting this vacuum tube system, or amplifier, that I saw in magazines. And that's when I started going to my father, building his own system. I said, you know, my father's system sounded fantastic. I mean, I was 10, 11, 12 years old, but I still remember the way that the sound was like a lagoon kind of, you know, pulsing around us, you know. Glenn Miller music, Harry James, you know. I said, well, what the hell's wrong with this stuff? So I saw this amp, and I read up on stuff. I went to an audition, and a guy said, you know, you don't want to buy this amp. It was a very famous Macintosh amplifier. It was called an MC250, I think. It's not made the same way it used to be made. The amp that's made the same way this used to be made is actually a Japanese amplifier called the Airtight ATM2. It uses the same tubes, but uses the same kind of circuitry, blah, 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 blah. And the transformers are hand wound in Japan, and amorphous core, blah, 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 blah. You know, old school technology, handcrafted in Japan. I go, okay, I'm gonna get it. I look it up, $9,000. Oh man, $9,000. I mean, I think then I might have still been an associate professor. I don't remember, but I couldn't afford $9,000. And I think it was my girlfriend. She said, why don't you just see if your agent will sell an article or something? You can, you know, sell an article. About what? She was about your insanity. You know, she's like losing patience already. And I said, oh, you mean about like tubes and audio and stuff? She goes, yeah, you can just. So I called my agent. We were in Hawaii. I was researching Coral Road, my book of poems. And we're actually, you know, we're in Hawaii and we were in North Shore of Oahu. I call her up, and she goes, well, how much do you need? I said, well, I mean, how much can you get? You know? She goes, tell me your idea. So I tell her what my idea is. She goes, it's not sexy. I go, well, how do I sex it up? She goes, well, what about opera? You started this whole thing with when you were at opera, when you were at the Scholar, right? And you fell in love, blah, blah, blah. Because how does like the tube thing relate to the opera thing? I go, well, and I start talking, and she goes, that sounds good. Why don't you write a thing like that? But I go, that's more than an article. She goes, but it's a book. I can sell a book. Or you can? She goes, yeah. How much do you need? I think. Okay, you better be careful when you answer this question. So I calculated in my head. Okay, first advance is 1/4 of the total. 1/4, 9,000 times 4 is what? 36,000. And I doubled it. 72,000. She goes, 72? I don't know if I can get that. I go, well, what can you get? She goes, well, write me a letter about it and then we'll talk. So I write her, she goes, I don't need a proposal, just write a letter describing what we just talked about. So that afternoon I write it up. Because, you know, I called her like first thing in the morning from Hawaii. It's still like 9 o'clock in the morning for us. It's like 6 o'clock or whatever. So by 2 o'clock I had the proposal, you know, in a form of an email to my agent. I called it Tube World. Great title. And she goes, this is interesting, Gary. I think I can sell this. I said, yeah? How much do you think you can get? She goes, well, I don't know, 72, but I'll tell you what. We take 15%, but I'll drop it to 10. So that you can have, you know, what you need. I go, how do you know what I need? She goes, well, it sounds like you need $9,000. So that was like the next morning, right? So by that afternoon, I get a call back. Okay, it's all set up. Sonny likes the idea, and you can work with Dan Frank at Pantheon. because Sunny's not everything anymore. And, you know, just a couple more. How much? How much? Oh, just like we said. So like in a, you know, a couple of weeks I get the check for $9,000. I finally got an amplifier. And that's how the idea of the book got started. I get the amplifier, it plays opera. Actually, Mozart's Mass in C minor, you know that piece? It's beautiful. Beautiful piece of music. And then I had to write the book. I'd be obligated. You know, I had the money, I got the amplifier. Oh shit, I have to write the book. So the book took me about 9 more years to write. Because in a way I was still a novice. And I needed to know more. Not only about equipment, but about writing something like this. So I had to have sort of like adventures, you know. And, you know, learn how to describe music. Learn how to write about the technology. Learn how to write about opera. And there were all these tasks. And along the way, I taught myself how to write about the blues, about rock and roll, about jazz, about symphonic music, you know, Renaissance choral music. And I had a great exploration of different kinds of music. I also dove into my own life. And the playlist there mostly comes from my youth. Even the Razumovsky Quartet by Beethoven, you know, which is something I played in a little 3 LP stack with Coltrane and Miles Davis when I was in college. So I learned, and I practiced different kinds of writing. It didn't all come together, but the writing of it took about 3 years. But the experience and the meditating and the practicing about 6. But that's how the book got started.
Yeah, I have 2 questions that I want to ask you based on what you were just talking about, and I'm going to try to tie the 2 together. One question is about the structure of the book, right? Because you have to weave together all of these different threads. But you brought up writing about music, and when I saw the Perfect Sound as the title of the book, and I know you're as a poet, so my mind went immediately to poetry, right? So I've been wanting to ask you, how did you draw upon your work as a poet, right? So you're saying you're a novice and you're going to this project. Were you sort of pulling things that come naturally to you as a writer of poetry and putting this together? And then maybe, does that have anything to do with the structure of the book and moving it all together too?
Well, it's another long answer. Well, the problem with poetry, particularly American poetry, is it's not capacious. It's not even as capacious as Whitman. Certainly not capacious as Hesiod, you know, works in days, or Lucretius. It's become this sort of fortune in a cookie, in a way, you know. It's very brief and it has this moment. To write the 2 memoirs that I produced, I had to sort of unravel the sort of tightness of sensibility that it takes to write, let's say, a contemporary poem, and let it sort of wander into more discursiveness, more reportage, appreciate the background, in a way be a little more like scholarship or critical writing, but not really. And I turned to poetic texts that I love, which are not considered poetry, but which I consider poetic in other languages, particularly Japanese. And the models there are Yoshida Keiko, who's an 18th century Japanese writer of memoir. His book is Surezure Kusana, and it refers to the calligraphy, style of calligraphy called Following the Brush. Surezure means wandering or aimless, and it's called Grass Riding. His prose is so beautiful, you know. And then also, there's a poet of the 12th century, Kamo no Chome, he wrote a book called Hojoki, and it was a chronicle of a plague year in Kyoto. It's kind of the Japanese Ecclesiastes, or Jehovah's. Very beautiful. And I studied this in grad school, you know. There's not an English equivalent quite, because English prose is so prosy. Japanese prose is very poetic, and then contemporary practitioners like them are Yasunari Kawabata, Yasunari, Snow Country, The Sound of the Mountain, Nobel Prize winner. And actually, the essays of Emerson and Thoreau, and ultimately the prose, particularly Moby Dick by Melville, are the things that are most like this Japanese writing. So I modeled my first memoir, Volcano, after that writing. And from Volcano, I sort of learned to write about technical things like that. I wrote about, you know, volcanoes in the rainforest. So this are about the development of amplification, acoustic and also electronic. You know, and as far as poetry goes, I didn't give up the sensibility. You know, you give up the compactness, the sort of, what shall I call it? That's, you know, I'll say it pejoratively, the preciousness of poetry. You give that up and you just focus on the sensibility, that which inspires. And rather than writing like a fortune for a cookie, write this essay, write this explanation, write this account, you know. And so the music in my head was the music of that Japanese stuff. And a little bit of Emerson, a little bit of, not much more Melville, particularly the cetology chapters of what we did. And that's how I kept poetry in it. And that I kept the inspiration to it, but not the structure or the style or the execution. You know? So I think this is why, well, you know, when I was editing the first memoir with my editor then, he was a wonderful fucking guy. He's an amazing guy. He's a Sikh from the north of India. He was educated at Cambridge. His father was in the Nehru's cabinet. And he was a genius, a publishing genius, and they stole him away from paperback publishing in England to write Knopf. And he had like 6 or 7 writers that he edited. He edited Edward Said, V.S. Naipaul, Michael Ondaatje, Julia Childs, Robert McNamara, Richard Ford, and the dummy of the runt of the litter me. But he sat down in the Bonaventure Hotel in LA over 2 days editing my manuscript. And he looked at me and he said, you know, his idea of having breakfast together was 3 bottles of Jameson's and a bowl of pistachios. So I go with him, you know, expecting, he says, let's have breakfast together. And I see that's all he's got. But he says, he looks at the manuscript, he's gasped. Now I know why it took you so long to write this book. It's not prose, is it? So you're right, the poetry is always behind it all. The impulse, the loyalty to feeling, the loyalty to those glimmers of inspiration. So that's my answer. You know, I also was able to write about my mentors. You know, Robert Hayden, Charles Wright, Etheridge Knight, people, elders who took me under their wing, as it were. So I give homage to my teachers, Wakato Yamauchi and other.
Thank you for that answer. Nick, are you gesturing towards
one more question?
One more question. Well, I mean, I think that you touched on this a little bit, but I mean, a sense of lineage is so important for poets and writers. And the way you speak about musicians in this book, it made me think that, or made me want to ask you about whether you see musicians or even, you know, works of opera like La Boheme, sort of in your lineage, that you are sort of both sort of, you know, writing back to and sort of looking ahead?
Well, I consider Puccini, the composer of Long Way, a sort of forefather feeling, certainly. Charles Mingus in jazz, his principles, his multi-culturalism, his incredible, avant-garde, but also Duke Ellington, Mingus, and the blues. My brother and I, when we were teenagers in LA, played the blues, So the blues is part of it too. The elder traditions are also music. I love Mozart, particularly the Requiem and the Mass in C minor. Music too. So much so, I wrote about the first music, the sort of Iraq song that we found in the stone in Iraq.
Yeah.
And I wrote about the guy who transcribed it and played it on a lyre, And being a poet, it's allowed me to do this kind of thing because nobody expects you to create instantly. Everybody else has to hurry up, right? But they expect poets to take a long time, because that's supposedly the gig. So I do all this other stuff under the guise of being a poet. But I just take the same amount of time. It's a long meditation. It's just that the words are more capacious.
Well, thank you very much. So let's open it up to questions from folks here. If you need the microphone, I can hand it to you, or I can repeat the question.
What's something contemporary that you've read lately that you've truly cherished?
Truly cherished?
Truly cherished.
Gee, that's a hard question in a way. I'm rereading my teacher's work, Charles Wright, his later work, for a particular reason. I truly cherish that work. I think there's also an answer I didn't complete about poetry and music and my work. It's Dante. It's the Divina Commedia. The Commedia is sort of behind a lot of the capaciousness, or the agenda of capaciousness in my writing. So there's a translation by Michael Palma of the Inferno, which is very good, that I treasure. And of course Robert Pinsky's, and then Merwin's translation of the Purgatorio. So contemporary work, I consider the translations contemporary, I suppose. In poetry, that's a very hard question because there's so much of it. And, I don't know. People are so quarrelsome in ways. It's hard. I remember Lady Michaels told me, don't ever say anything you like or don't like. Don't get mad at you no matter what. There's a book called I think it's called Black Box by Teju Cole. A book of essays. Some of it's really good, some of it's okay, some of it's really astonishing, like his account of trying to find a boat that Arabic immigrants took to cross the Mediterranean to Italy. That essay is astonishing because it's not an overwrought piece, it's quite honest about his own distance from that experience and those people. And I find it quite moving. But Teju Cole is somebody I really like. I find it easier to answer more honestly about fiction writers in a way, because I really don't know them, I just read them. But when you have a poetic heart, it's to me. Yeah, I don't know, you're in that swirl, but it's vicious. Any other question?
Do you have a particular writing process that works well for poetry and or prose?
Getting out of town. I work pretty hard at my job. It's very demanding, particularly as the university tries to supposedly make things better. They just create more bureaucracy and administrative steps to get anything accomplished. So there's a lot of your consciousness is taken over executing agendas created by make work types. And it degrades the quality of internal meditation you did. So I find it very useful to get out of town. That's one benefit of getting uptown is you're freshening, it clears your mind from the petty angers that you experience and responding to all that all the time. So once the school year's over, I get out of town. I go to Paris, I go to the south of France, I go to Italy. This year, no, but you know, I find it very beneficial, and I write a lot because I'm free. You know, I used to go to a volcano in Hawaii, but I have a daughter I'm finishing 2 races today, and I like to take her along. So it's very boring for her in volcano. It's just a rainforest. How can you go? There's no society, there's no people. It's just rain and ferns, and you know. So I've been choosing like France and Italy, so she can sort of frolic in the shopping centers. You know? And I go there. When I'm in town and need to write and have space to write, I sit down in the mornings and I just sort of fall into my own daydreams. I try not to do anything except make a cup of coffee. And you know, I tell myself, don't check on the box score of the Dodger game last night. I just hit the table and write. And I have 3 notebooks. I have a large notebook, wide margin for poetry. I have a little notebook for poetry ideas. And then I have a medium-sized notebook for prose ideas. And I look at them sometimes and see what next I have to do. And that's sort of the process. You know, I sketch like poem titles or topics a lot. I just make a list of them and then I knock them off as I go through the work. But I find that insinuation and inspiration is extremely precious, so I jot them down, even if I don't have time to execute anything. And then I go back and I try to fall into that rabbit hole.
One more?
One more.
So, Eric, as a kid in South Central LA, you didn't have a $9,000 receiver. You probably had transistor radio.
Yeah.
So, and you were born in 51?
Yeah.
So what were you listening to? Were you listening to AM radio on a transistor?
Yeah, I read about it in The Perfect Sound. We listened to a station called KGFJ, the soul of LA. It was a black station from Watts. And it played R&B, or race music as it was called. And it was a combination of old doo-wop stuff, you know, plus Motown and Stax World stuff. And like that's the first time I heard Aretha Franklin was on that station. First time I heard Wilson Pickett was on that station. And guess what? First time I heard Stevie Winwood was on that station. You know. So I was listening to that. And you know, singing doo-wop actually. I was singing with a black guy, another Japanese kid, and a white kid when we were in junior high. And it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about singing from that group. And so that's what I listened to. And then, you know, it sort of became, you know, Motown a lot, and then folk rock, acid rock, I don't know what they call it stuff. You know, I never much listened to the Rolling Stones or the Beatles ever. I listened to like, I don't know, Buffalo, Springfield, the Byrds, the LA groups actually. You know, Joni Mitchell, a lot. I heard Joni Mitchell, my daughter was saying how her mom had gone to the Joni Mitchell concert right up the gorge, you know. And I said, you know, I heard Joni Mitchell in 1969, right after Woodstock. She came to LA to perform with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And I went to those concerts. It was quite amazing. So that's what I listened to when I was young. But if you want to hear about the old doo-wop, I'm sorry to talk about that too.
I think on that note, let's put Garrett's playlist back on.
Thank you all for staying and listening.
We have a free sound for sale over here. So you'll pick up the
Bye.